Welcome to Creepy Vibes. We're venturing deep into the heart of the Texas hill country, where the land is as vast as its legends, and every trail hides something watching from the shadows. These aren't made-up ghost stories. These are 20 true encounters from hikers who were followed by something they couldn't explain. From strange footsteps echoing in dry canyons to shadows slipping behind the rocks. These stories will make you think twice before hiking alone. But here's something strange. So many people watch these videos, but they don't subscribe. Seriously, does it cost money to subscribe? No, it's free. So if you're enjoying the chills and want more terrifying stories, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now. It helps a lot and keeps the horror coming, because once you step into these woods, turning back isn't always possible. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because in this part of Texas, night falls fast, and something always follows. He wasn't running from anything, at least not anything he could name. Jared had always been a quiet guy, the kind of man who didn't do crowds, didn't do dinner parties, didn't do the fluorescent hum of open-plan offices or the babble of polite small talk. What he did do ever since he bailed on the tech world and sold his overpriced Austin condo was hike. Alone, off-grid, unbothered. The hill country was his cathedral now, and he worshipped with every bootstep across the dry earth. He kept a trail journal in his truck, documenting every hike with a kind of reverence most men reserved for lovers or whiskey. The day he decided to try Switchback Ridge, the morning sky was bruised with early summer heat and the promise of wind. And he was in that strange sort of peace only solitude can give. Switchback Ridge wasn't on the AllTrails app. He found it by accident while sipping black coffee and flipping through an old Forest Service map he picked up at a garage sale in Boerne. The trail was faintly marked, a snaking line through elevation that crossed several limestone cutbacks, and hugged the side of an old hill the map labeled Ridge 407. It wasn't far from Devil's Hollow, and something about that made him grin. He was always chasing that feeling, the kind that makes your skin crawl a little but keeps your feet moving forward anyway. The trailhead was nothing more than a rusted gate and a faded warning sign half swallowed by brush. No trespassing, it said in red spray paint, but the hinges were broken and no one around for miles. He parked his truck beneath a live oak and set off just after 9 a.m., his pack light, his boots tied tight, and the silence wrapped around him. Like a second skin, the ridge was beautiful in a dry, forgotten kind of way. Sharp mesquite stabbed through the rock and white-tailed deer flashed through the scrub like ghosts. Lizards scurried at his approach, and the sound of cicadas was a low, endless scream under the sun. The trail wound sharply and steeply, hence the name, he figured, and switchbacked up the slope with lazy curves, each turn revealing more rocks, more sky, more quiet. It started on the third switchback. He heard footsteps, not the echo of his own, not the delayed crunch of gravel under heel. These were distinct, a second set, behind him. Not close, but not far either. Jared stopped walking. The sound stopped too. He turned, squinting into the sunlight filtering down through the branches. Nothing. Just scrub and boulders and dust. He stood still for a full minute, listening. Nothing but cicadas and a breeze scraping through dry leaves. He told himself it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a wild hog, or the echo of his own movement bouncing weird off the rocks. It had happened before on narrow canyons. The acoustics out here were strange sometimes. That was the charm of it. He walked on. A half-mile later, it came again. Crunch, crunch. A slow, steady rhythm 2 beats behind his own. Then it stopped. When he stopped, again, Jared turned faster this time. He scanned the trail behind him. Nothing. But something in the air had shifted. The breeze had died. Even the cicadas sounded muted, like the landscape was holding its breath. Jared unslung his water bottle and drank, more for show than thirst. He gave the impression of a man taking a break, hoping whatever was behind him might reveal itself or get bored and leave. But the trail stayed empty. Just rocks and the thin whine of a high-altitude hawk. Still, he didn't turn back. He was too far in. He didn't spook easy. On the fifth switchback, the temperature dropped out not much, maybe 5 degrees, but enough to raise the hair on his arms. The air felt thicker, like walking through spiderwebs. He told himself the elevation was changing. Shade pooling near the cliff walls. He pressed on, but his pace quickened. Just a little. Just enough. That's when the shadows began to move. They didn't dart. They didn't slither. They simply shifted, like something large was stepping. Between the rocks ahead, just out of direct sight, just behind his periphery. The first time, he thought it was a bird overhead casting a sudden flicker across the ground, but the shadow was too dense. Too wrong. He turned. There was nothing there, but the rocks were closer. Not physically. That would be absurd. They were. Just boulders, some weather-worn, others jagged, all of them bleaching in the sun for centuries. But they felt closer. Like they were leaning toward the trail, a little more than they should. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Jared felt stupid for thinking that. He chuckled out loud, a dry sound meant to shake the feeling. It didn't help Dot another 20 minutes up. The ridge and the trail narrowed, flanked by high rock walls on either side. The switchbacks had become tighter now, almost claustrophobic, forcing him to hug the edge of the cliff as he moved forward. He was about to round another turn when he caught movement again. This time dashed closer. Black, low to the ground. Darting. Behind a cluster of brush and gone before his eyes. Could focus. He froze. Listened. The footsteps were back, but now they weren't behind him. They were above. The sound came from up on the ridge, where the boulders stacked like broken teeth against the sky. Something large shifting, dislodging pebbles. A scrape of stone against stone. Then silence. Jared backed up slowly, craning his neck, looking for any sign of movement. His heart hammered in his chest. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in anything, really. But the thing above him wasn't a trick of the light. He saw it move. A shape, not an animal, not a man, too tall, too thin, and then it was gone, swallowed by the rocks. Jared turned around, suddenly aware of how far he'd come. The trail behind him felt longer now, stretched somehow, like a tunnel growing the more you ran through it. He started to descend fast, almost jogging, but the footsteps were with him again. Only this time, they didn't stop when he stopped. They kept coming. Jared spun, ready to confront whoever or whatever was playing games with him out here. He shouted, something primal and loud. A sound to declare dominance or scare off wildlife. But what stepped from behind the rocks wasn't scared. It wasn't human either. It stood at the edge of the trail where the sun couldn't reach. Its shape wavered like heat off asphalt, but it was darker than the shadow it hid in. 2 pinpricks of red glowed where eyes should be. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It just watched. Jared backed away, slow. 1 step, 2, 3. Then it moved, quick. A blurred gone. He turned and ran. His boots slipped on gravel. His shoulder slammed into a jagged outcrop, but he didn't stop. He didn't stop until he saw the rusted gate, the glint of his truck in the distance, the safety of the road. He didn't stop until he was inside, doors locked, heart trying to punch through his ribs. The trail behind him was still, empty. But the rocks hadn't stopped watching. He doesn't hike anymore. He sold the truck. Moved into the city. Blinds drawn tight, every light on, even at noon. He tells people he got heat stroke that day, hallucinated, got spooked by a mountain lion maybe, but when he sleeps. If he sleeps, he hears footsteps, crunch, right behind him. They weren't supposed to be there that early in the year. Devil's Hollow Trail was better known for its fall colors and spooky name than for any real danger. But folks from nearby Garland, Texas still told stories about it. How the fog could roll in out of nowhere, how sometimes it never rolled out. But in the end, it was just a trail, one of those forgotten paths in a hollow behind a dried-up creek bed. You had to drive 20 minutes off the main road just to find the old trailhead, which looked more like the start of a deer run than a marked hike. Eli and his younger sister Sarah had always liked the weird places, the ones with stories. Mom used to tell them ghost tales about that hollow when they were kids. Something about a woman who went missing back in the 1950s, a preacher's wife who vanished in a fog while searching for her runaway dog. They used to laugh about it. Even now, Eli was 25 and Sarah 22, but that kind of nostalgia had a way of sticking around. So when Eli came home for spring break, they planned one of their little adventures, just like old times. The day started warm, dry, and cloudless. They parked near the old barbed wire fence and slipped through the trees. Just after 9 a.m., Eli had a small pack with sandwiches, water, and a flashlight just in case. Sarah brought her camera, always hoping to snap something creepy for her blog. The trail was thin and overgrown in places, but not difficult. The birds were loud and obnoxious, squirrels ran ahead of them, and for the first hour, everything was just as it should be. Peaceful. Normal. Then, around noon, the temperature dropped. It didn't happen gradually. One moment they were sweating through their shirts, and the next, a sharp chill pressed down on them like a wet sheet. Sarah zipped up her hoodie. Eli frowned and looked up. The sky hadn't changed, still a washed-out spring blue, but the air felt wrong. It had that metallic edge, like right before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't a cloud to be seen. Then came the fog. It slipped between the trees without warning. Not rolling, not drifting, just appearing, like it had been there all along, hiding in the tree trunks. Thick and white, with a hint of gray that looked yellow in the sunlight. In less than a minute, the trail behind them disappeared. Sarah turned slowly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her camera bag. "Eli?" she whispered. "I see it," he said. "Just stay close." She moved beside him, brushing his arm. That's when they heard the first whisper. It didn't come from the trees. It came from the fog itself, as if the mist was exhaling sound. Just one word. He froze. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Even though he already knew she had. Sarah nodded, her mouth slightly open. Then it came again. Sarah. This time it was closer. A voice, unmistakably female. Not a shout. A whisper, soft and low, like someone speaking across your pillow while you sleep. Eli turned in a slow circle, trying to find the source, but the fog was too thick. The trail ahead was still visible, but it narrowed, curling downhill between sharp boulders that jutted up like broken teeth. "Let's go back," Sarah said. "Yeah," he agreed. They turned, but the trail was gone, not faded, not obscured, gone. The trees behind them looked the same, but there was no path, no packed dirt, no sign they had ever walked through. Just dead leaves and rocks. Sarah's breath quickened. "I swear we came from this way. Sarah?" They both spun around. She was standing 10 feet down the trail. A woman, tall, pale, long, dark hair soaked flat against her skull and shoulders. She wore a light gray dress that clung to her like wet paper. It had no pattern, no color, just a washed-out uniform gray. Her feet were bare, toes curled into the dirt. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her head tilted slightly left, like she'd been watching them for a while and had just now decided to say something. Eli. She whispered. Eli took a step back. Who? Are you? He asked. The woman smiled. It was the kind of smile you'd see in a dream, beautiful but broken at the edges. Like her face had forgotten how to move naturally. We didn't tell her our names, Sarah whispered, grabbing his sleeve. The woman took a step forward. Water ran off her dress, dripping soundlessly to the dirt. I think we need to go, Sarah hissed. Eli didn't move. His eyes were locked on the woman. There was something about her. Not just the way she looked, but the way the fog clung to her, as if she weren't inside it, but made from it. Her outline blurred, not like a mirage, more like static. Then, she whispered something else. Come back down. The trail's waiting. Sarah turned and ran. Eli followed without a word. They barreled through the fog, tripping over roots and scraping against tree bark. The woods closed in. Nothing looked familiar. There were no trail markers, no sounds, not even birds anymore. Just the wet crunch of leaves and their own ragged breath, and the whisper. Always close, never behind, never ahead, beside them. Like, the fog was running too. They stumbled into a clearing surrounded by low stone walls, half buried in dirt and ivy. At the center stood an old wooden cross, black with rot, leaning at a painful angle. A graveyard, forgotten and swallowed by the woods. Eli collapsed against one of the stones. Sarah stood panting, eyes wide, trying to get her phone to work. No signal. We're not supposed to be here, she said. This isn't on any map. Eli looked at the stones. They were old, barely legible. Most had dates from the early 1900s. One, though, stood newer, cleaner, as if someone had placed it there recently. It read, Margaret Holloway, 19271953, return and I will guide you home. Sarah dropped her phone. That's her, she said. That's the preacher's wife. That's the story Mom used to tell. Eli reached out and touched the stone. The fog fell silent. For a moment, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Then, behind them, a sound like bare feet slapping wet dirt. Eli turned. She was there. Closer than ever, face pale as the stone, eyes wide and unblinking, her mouth open, but no words came. Only a long, wet sigh. Sarah screamed and ran toward the trees. L.A. moved to follow, but his foot caught something in the ground. A rope. No, a finger. Pale, gray, reaching up from the soil. Another hand shot from the ground and gripped his ankle. Eli screamed, kicking, but more hands came. Dozens, from under the leaves, from behind the stones. All pale, all cold, pulling, grabbing. The fog roared in his ears. Sarah turned back and saw him vanish into the ground. Gone. Like he'd never been there. She stood frozen, eyes wide, chest heaving. Then the woman in the fog turned toward her and smiled. Sarah. She whispered. Sarah ran. She ran until her lungs bled and her legs gave out. Until the trees thinned and the fog faded. Until she burst out near the road where their car was parked. She never looked back. Not once. They found her 2 days later, huddled under the car, still shaking, still whispering. She doesn't speak now. Not about what happened, but sometimes. If you ask the right park ranger, they'll tell you that hikers still disappear on Devil's Hollow Trail, and every so often, someone sees a woman in a soaked gray dress, standing barefoot in the fog, whispering names she shouldn't know. It was an overcast Friday when they arrived at the trailhead. A warm wind rolled over the pine-covered hills like a breath holding secrets it didn't want to share. Jeremy was the first to spot the crooked wooden sign nailed into a sagging post. Trail 19 closed, do not enter. It read in faded red paint that had been smeared like blood across the surface. The sign leaned slightly, half-rotted from years of rain and time, but still standing. Still warning. No one paid it much mind. Or rather, they did, but only in that way young people do when something seems more like a challenge than a threat. 5 of them, in total. Jeremy, his girlfriend Carla, their mutual friend Vince, and the inseparable duo of Alicia and Brooke. All seniors at Texas State, all bored of the same river tubing and campus bar weekends. Jeremy had found Trail 19 in an old Reddit thread about Texas trails that don't show up on modern maps, the kind of stuff that was clickbait for would-be explorers. There had been comments about a disappearance in 87 cryptic phrases, like nobody who went past the second ridge came back right, and the ranger station doesn't even list that trail anymore. That was all it took to spark the plan. It wasn't on the official park website, but Trail 19 was real. You just had to know where to look. The park ranger at the gate had waved them through without asking questions. It was early spring, the trees half-budded, and the hills wet from a week of storms. Perfect for hiking, Jeremy had said. Perfect for something different. The start of Trail 19 looked like any other. A narrow dirt path hemmed in by live oaks and cedar, a gentle slope leading into the hill country behind the established trails. But unlike the others, there were no trail markers, no mile signs. The path didn't feel worn, like it had been walked regularly. Still, it was there, threading its way deeper into the woods, and they followed it with an energy that comes from doing something you're not supposed to. It was quiet. That was the first real sign something was off. No bird song, no bugs, just wind. Even the usual rustle of squirrels or the occasional deer snap never came. Vince made a joke about how it felt like they were walking into a painting, one where everything was dead. Carla laughed. The others didn single quotes an hour in. The fog started rolling in, soft at first, just fingers curling low along the trail. By the second hour, it was a waist-high wall, thick and wet, clinging to their clothes like spiderwebs. Visibility dropped. The air grew colder. Jeremy tried to joke about it being atmospheric, but even he was starting to feel the weight of the silence. Then they found the first one. It was a boot, half buried in the mud, torn down the side like something had bitten into it. Jeremy yanked it free with a stick, turned it over, and saw the initials burned into the sole. D.H. He went still. That was one of the names mentioned in the Reddit thread. Derek Hines, a sophomore who vanished in 1987 on a geology field trip. His body was never found. They should have turned back then. Carla even said it. But Alicia said they'd come this far, and Brooke agreed. So they pressed on, deeper into the fog. Somewhere past the second ridge, they found the camp. Old tents, collapsed and covered in moss. A rusted-out lantern. A nylon backpack with R. Castillo stitched on the strap, another name from the disappearances. Jeremy didn't say anything this time. He just stared. Vince nudged an old thermos with his boot and muttered, "Creepy as hell." No one laughed. That was when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It was soft at first, a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across wet leaves. Then came the footsteps. Not human ones, not animal either. They were uneven, slow, almost hesitant. Jeremy spun around, shining his phone flashlight through the trees, but there was nothing. Just fog and shadows. Then Brooke screamed. She pointed toward the trees, her face pale, mouth shaking too much to form words. The rest turned in time to see a shape slip between the trees, something tall and thin, moving wrong, as if its joints weren't put together the way they should be. The fog closed behind it like a curtain. They ran, not back the way they came. None of them could tell which way was back. The trail had vanished. Trees twisted in unfamiliar patterns, and the fog seemed to pulse with their panic, growing denser. The faster they moved, Alicia tripped. Vince tried to help her up, but then he stopped, frozen, eyes wide, staring past her. "What is that?" He whispered. Dot had stepped out of the mist, close this time. Close enough that they could see it wasn't a person. Not anymore. It had the shape of one, sure, arms, legs, even clothes that looked rotted and stained with something dark. But its head was wrong, elongated. No eyes, just holes. Holes where the face should be. It tilted its head and made a sound like laughter being strangled through a wet throat. Jeremy grabbed Carla's hand and bolted. Brooke followed Alicia close. Behind, Vince didn't move. The thing reached out that no one saw what happened to him. They ran blind. Carla sobbed as she ran, kept muttering that she could still hear her name being whispered in the fog. Alicia stumbled again and screamed that something was touching her hair. Jeremy stopped long enough to shine the light behind them, but there was only mist and a faint echo of movement. They didn't stop until they found the cabin, old and broken. Half collapsed on one side, it sat like a dead thing among the trees. Jeremy kicked in the door. Inside was mold and rot and the smell of something long dead, but it had walls. They huddled inside, trying to catch their breath. Carla was shaking. Alicia had scratches on her neck that hadn't been there before. Brooke sat with her back to the wall, staring at the door. "Vince is dead," she said quietly. No one argued. They stayed there until night fell. No one dared speak. Outside, something moved through the trees. Sometimes they heard footsteps. Sometimes it sounded like whispers, saying their names one by one. Slow and careful, like someone savoring each syllable. At some point, Alicia asked, "What if it doesn't let us leave?" Jeremy said nothing. Carla cried quietly in the corner. Brooke stood and walked to the window, then froze. "It's watching," she said. "It's waiting for us to open the door." Jeremy stood, crossed the room, and looked out. He saw nothing, just fog. But something was pressing against the glass, a face-shaped imprint in the condensation. No features, just holes. They didn't sleep. By morning, Alicia was gone. The door hadn't been opened. No one had heard her leave. Carla started laughing. Not like she thought it was funny, more like she was breaking. She kept saying she could hear Alicia giggling in the trees. Jeremy held her until she stopped. Only 3 left. They tried to leave, but the trail had vanished. Every direction led them deeper, like the woods had folded in on themselves. The fog didn't burn off in the sun. It stayed thick, almost living. Brooke said she could see shapes moving in it, tall figures, always watching. That night, Brooke stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. Carla screamed for her to stop, but she didn't even turn around. She stepped out, whispered something. They couldn't hear, and vanished into the mist. Then there were 2. Carla begged Jeremy to kill her before it took her too. She said she couldn't take the voices anymore. Couldn't take hearing Brooke cry outside the walls. She said they all sounded wrong, like they were pretending to be human but weren't. Jeremy held her all night. By sunrise, she was gone too. The door still locked. No sound. Just fog curling in through the window. Jeremy tried walking. Didn't matter which way. The trees shifted. He passed the same mossy rock 3 times. The same bent tree. The same dead squirrel. Time started to stretch. He stopped knowing how long he'd been there. The sky never changed. Sometimes it rained. Sometimes he thought he saw Vince just ahead on the trail, walking away. Sometimes he followed. He found himself back at the boot once. Still torn, still half buried. He picked it up and held it for a long time. He doesn't remember when he stopped trying to leave. He remembers the fog opening and something stepping out. He remembers it whispering his name. Now the sign still stands, faded and broken, just outside the trailhead. Some nights, kids come to look, to laugh, to take selfies next to it. Most leave. A few don't. Trail 19 was closed for a reason, but it's always hungry for someone dumb enough to come back. He had been hiking for 2 days through the jagged limestone trails outside of Leakey, Texas, chasing the fading sun as it slipped over the canyon edges like melting gold. Logan wasn't new to solo hikes. In fact, he preferred them. No one slowing. Him down, no one talking about politics or work. No one complaining about sore feet or blisters. Just him, the sky, and the land stretching in every direction. He had started early that morning from a private trail entrance someone had told him about. Only locals know it, they'd said, and followed a deer path that wove between mesquite and cedar, dipping deeper into the valley where no cell towers reached, and the shadows held on to the night a little longer than they should have. He hadn't planned to sleep out there. The weather had been fair, sky clear, but sometime after 6 p.m., the temperature dropped fast and clouds rolled in so thick they looked like smoke from a burning hill. Then came the wind, sudden, dry, and unrelenting. It cut sideways across the ridge, whistling through the trees, kicking dust in his eyes, and howling like something was chasing him. He pulled his jacket tighter, tried to find the main trail. Again, but visibility was near zero. The wind drowned out everything, even his own breath. That's when he saw it. The cave dot, it wasn't deep, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall and only about 10 feet back, but it was enough to duck out of. The wind and wait things out. He knelt just inside the lip of the cave, the walls pressing close with ancient heat. It smelled faintly of earth, damp stone, and something else ... Something older. He convinced himself it was just a dead animal deeper in, maybe a fox or coyote. Nothing strange. Still, he never took off his boots as night fell. The wind only grew worse. It screamed against the outer rocks, sending occasional gusts spiraling into the cave. At first, Logan listened to music to tune it out, but the battery died quicker than expected. With no service, no GPS, and only the storm outside to keep him company, he gave up and tried to sleep. He laid his pack under his head, tucked his arms into his chest, and pulled his hood down low. Somewhere between dreaming and waking, he heard it. Not the wind, not any more breathing, not his own. Someone else's, slow, deliberate, and wet. It was close. Too close. He felt heat on his cheek. The hairs on the back of his neck stiffened as the sound rasped out again. He froze, every muscle clenched. His eyes stayed shut. He knew, somehow, that if he opened them, he'd see something he couldn't unsee. The breathing came again, and this time it trembled. Like it was excited, he opened his eyes anyway. Pitch black. He reached slowly for his flashlight, not the one on his phone, but the mini mag light clipped to his belt and clicked it on. The beam wobbled as his hands trembled. The walls of the cave swam into view. Nothing in front of him, nothing to the side. He turned around slowly, heart thundering, still nothing except the walls. They weren't smooth like he remembered. There were grooves now, deep gouges in the stone, almost like someone had dragged sharpened nails through solid rock. He stepped closer, squinting. The marks formed strange arcs, almost symbols, repeating, etched into the stone in layers, some older and faded, some fresh, so fresh they still flaked with dust. He moved the light lower. His name was scratched into the stone. Logan repeated 3 times, one above the other. He stumbled back, smacking his head against the cave wall. His light flickered. He spun around and saw more names, dozens, maybe hundreds, written in the same jagged fashion. Some were half finished, some smeared. Some names he recognized vaguely, as if he'd heard them on the news or whispered at gas stations. All of them etched into the walls like epitaphs. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in his ear this time. It echoed from deeper in the cave, deeper than it should have gone. Stay. He bolted. Light swinging wildly, he dashed out into the wind. It knocked him sideways, but he kept going, sliding down loose gravel, thorns ripping at his clothes. He didn't care. He just had to get away from that cave. That voice, those names. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the horizon was beginning to bleed with a grayish-blue haze. He hiked non-stop until his legs gave out, collapsing near a creek. Bed. He waited there until full daylight. Only when he was sure the wind had died down, only when birds returned to the trees, did he risk looking back. There was no cave. He walked back to the exact spot. GPS confirmed it, but the ridge wall was solid. No opening. No shelter. Number. Scratch marks. No trace he'd ever been there. Just flat limestone and scattered brush. He even checked his own pack for dust, hair, fibers, anything, but it was clean. As if he dreamed the entire thing. Except he still couldn't shake the feeling of that breath, that warmth on his cheek, that voice curling in his ear like smoke. He drove back to San Antonio in silence, every passing tree and shadow along the highway feeling like it watched him. For weeks, he didn't speak about it. Not to his friends, not to the ranger he called anonymously to ask if people had ever gone missing near Trail 27, or was it 29? He couldn't remember now. They told him no such trail existed past that ridge. Months passed. Logan started waking up at night drenched in sweat, convinced something was whispering to him from the corners of his room. He tried to ignore it, but the dreams worsened. Dreams of standing in that cave, unable to move, as something scraped his name deeper and deeper into the rock. One night he woke to find dirt under his fingernails and stone dust on his pillow. Next morning, he checked his closet. On the back wall, behind an old coat, he found claw marks. And beneath them, etched into the sheetrock, was his name. Not once, but 3 times. Melissa had always loved this time of year. The air smelled like pine needles and sun-warmed bark, and the trails west of New Braunfels were quiet, just the way she liked them. It was early evening, the hour when the woods start to shift into. Shadow and light dances through the trees like it's got a secret to tell. She parked at the Cedar Hollow trailhead around 6:30 p.m., clipped her water bottle to her hip, tightened the straps on her day pack, and let Tucker, her golden retriever, bound out of the back seat with a bark and a tail wag that said he was ready to explore every leaf and squirrel in Texas. It was supposed to be just a short hike, 2 miles in and 2 miles out. She didn't bring snacks, didn't text anyone the exact location. Her phone was mostly for music or the occasional photo of Tucker sniffing a moss-covered stump. She felt safe here. She'd been coming to this patch of woods since she was in high school. It was familiar, quiet, but that kind of comfort is what gets you, what tricks you into thinking nothing bad could happen where the trees know your name. About half a mile in, Tucker vanished. 1 second he was trotting ahead on the narrow trail, ears perked, tail high. The next, he was gone, no rustling, no bark, just gone. She called for him, tried his usual commands, waited, listened, nothing. A few birds, the creak of a branch in the breeze, maybe a distant cicada. But no Tucker. She should have turned back then. Walked straight to the car, called for help, done what a responsible adult was supposed to do. But it didn't feel serious yet. Dogs ran off. He could be chasing something. She walked further, calling his name. The trail twisted deeper into the woods, and with each turn, the light got dimmer. The trees leaned in closer, older. Like the forest was trying to remember something about her. She began to hear the paw steps about 20 minutes later. They were faint at first. A steady padding behind her, then nothing. She'd stop, thinking he'd finally come back, but when she turned, no dog. No animal. Just the trail behind her, empty and still. She called again. "Tucker, come on, boy." Nothing but silence and trees. The paw steps started up again, closer this time. Soft, but not quiet. There's a difference. The kind of sound that knows it's being heard but doesn't care. Melissa turned again sharply this time, and again there was nothing there. She laughed, a tight, nervous thing. "Okay, Melissa, you're just spooking yourself. Probably some other animal. Armadillo. Maybe even another hiker's dog back there. It's fine." She walked faster. The paw steps followed. Not right behind her, not brushing against her heels, but close enough to feel. That strange sensation you get when someone's watching you, standing too close behind in line. She thought of turning again, but some part of her brain whispered, "Don't, just keep walking." She was sweating now, even though the air had cooled. A drop slid down her spine. The forest had changed. She couldn't say exactly when or how, but the trail looked unfamiliar. She didn't remember that twisted tree, the one that looked like it had a face carved into the bark. She didn't remember the way the ground sloped unevenly here, or how the underbrush grew too thick and tall, almost trying to crawl into the trail itself. The woods weren't quiet anymore. They were listening. Melissa tried her phone. No signal. No map loading. Just a spinning wheel and 9% battery. She slid it into her back pocket and tried to stay calm. Kept walking. And still the paw steps came. Then she heard breathing, not her own. Not a panting retriever behind her. Something else. A wet, low sound like someone struggling to take in air through a mouth that didn't quite work right. It was close, so close, and it didn't stop when she stopped. It paused a beat after she did, like it was pretending to stop. Like it wanted her to know it was there. She ran. Her boots pounded the trail. Twigs cracked underfoot, and her breath came in shallow bursts as branches whipped past her arms. The paw steps kept up. Not the soft shuffle of a golden retriever anymore. These were heavier, not four-footed. It sounded like hands, like palms slapping the dirt, dragging behind her. She finally turned. There was nothing, but the trees were wrong again. Too close together. The path behind her looked choked, overgrown. Hadn't it been clear just a moment ago? Her chest ached. She leaned against a tree, trying to breathe. Something scraped the bark behind her. She spun around. Still nothing. Then she heard it. A voice, low and garbled. "Mel. Is A." Her blood turned cold. No one should know her name. She hadn't seen a soul on the trail. The voice came again, closer. "Melissa." She bolted off the path entirely, not caring anymore. Just trying to put space between her and whatever was stalking her. She tore through brambles, slipped down a shallow incline, hands grabbing roots and rocks to stay upright. Somewhere above, something moved through the trees fast, heavy, almost scrambling. She reached a small clearing. The kind of place where you could almost breathe again if it weren't for the absolute wrongness of it. Rocks formed a rough circle. In the center was a pile of bones, small ones, animal maybe, but some looked too straight, too clean. Something wet lay beside them. A strip of golden fur. Tucker. She took a step forward, and that's when she saw it. At the edge of the clearing, crouched behind a tree. It looked like a person at first, but it wasn't. It was too thin, too tall, skin pale and stretched like it had forgotten how to wear itself. Its mouth was open, too wide, teeth long and black. Its eyes were wrong. sunk deep into its face, black and glistening like something that had never seen sunlight. And it moved like it didn't have joints, like it had learned how to be human from watching broken puppets. It crawled toward her. Not fast, just steady. One hand slapping the ground. Then the other, a dragging, clawing sound behind it. Melissa couldn't move. Its mouth opened wider, and from it came the softest sound, a bark. A perfect mimicry of Tucker's bark. And then dash paw steps. From behind her. She turned and saw another one, this one smaller. Its face. Familiar. It was Tucker's face, stretched onto something else. Not a mask, not taxidermy. A mockery. She screamed finally, and the thing behind her screamed too louder, longer, a screech that split the air and made the trees shudder. She ran, didn't know where, didn't care. Just ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out and the world blurred into shades of green and gray. When they found her 2 days later, she was curled under a fallen log a mile from the trail, covered in scratches, her boots gone, her eyes wide open, unblinking. She didn't speak for hours. When she did, she only said one thing over and over again. I heard him behind me, but it wasn't him. It wasn't him. Tucker was never found, but rangers still here, barking on the trail at night. And sometimes if you stop and listen, you'll hear paw steps behind you, but you should never turn around. Louise had hiked Enchanted Rock plenty of times, even camped there once or twice with friends back when nights were filled with laughter, not silence. But something felt off this time. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to push him back toward the parking lot, or how even the squirrels and birds stayed quiet as he passed. He told himself it was just the time of year, late fall, when the tourists had gone and the park was mostly empty except for the occasional loner like him. That's what he needed anyway, time alone. A break from the static of Austin life. The pressure of the deadlines, the recent breakup with Mel that had left his apartment smelling like her shampoo long after she left. Nature was supposed to heal you, right? You go out, breathe the crisp air, walk until your legs ache, and return feeling cleansed. That's what he expected. What he got was something else entirely. He reached the summit just before sunset, took a few photos out of habit, but they didn't feel right. The light was strange, too orange, too thick, and the rock beneath his feet felt warm even though the wind had teeth. A buzzing started in his ears. He blamed it on the altitude, maybe dehydration, but the sensation wasn't inside his head. It was more like the rock itself was humming under him, like the granite dome had a heartbeat. He stood very still, hand on his knee, trying to convince himself not to bolt back down the slope like a scared kid. And that's when he saw it, or rather, didn't see it. A shape at the edge of his vision, just past the tree line below, where the granite met the shrubs. Blacker than the shadows, still, staring. He looked again, and it was gone. Typical. Tricks of the fading light, his rational mind said. Maybe a deer. But deer don't have glowing red eyes. Louis shook it off and headed back down to where he'd pitched his tent near the primitive site, a few hundred yards from any other campers, if there were any. He hadn't seen a single car when he pulled in. The ranger station was closed. No one at the kiosk, and even the bulletin board looked neglected, covered in spider webs and faded flyers. By the time he reached his tent, the sun had fully disappeared. He set up a small fire, heated up a pouch of beef stew, and forced himself to eat even though his stomach had that tight, unsettled feeling. The buzzing in his ears returned, louder now. He covered them with his hands. No relief. He stood, pacing, telling himself he was being dramatic. But then he saw it again. Not far from the trees, maybe 30 feet from his firelight's edge, was the shape. A figure. Tall, too thin, unmoving. The fire cracked, and Luis turned quickly, thinking maybe a branch had fallen. But when he looked back, the figure was gone. He laughed, dry and short, tried to convince himself it was nothing. His phone had no signal, which made it worse somehow. He kept checking anyway, refreshing the screen out of some desperate habit. No bars. He tossed it into the tent, zipped himself in, and told himself to sleep, but he didn't sleep, because something started walking around the tent. He heard the footfalls, slow, deliberate, crunching leaves and twigs. At first, he thought, it might be a raccoon or a stray deer, but then it circled. Not a quick pass, a full circle, slow, methodical, like it wanted him to know it was there. And then it stopped right outside the flap dot. Luis held his breath. The fire had burned low. Outside, casting flickering shadows. He could see them through the mesh of his tent, but this shadow was different. It didn't flicker. It stood still, tall, wrong. Its edges didn't dance like the others. It leaned forward slightly, like it was listening, and its eyes, God. The eyes glowed red through the fabric of the tent, steady and unblinking. He didn't move. Couldn't. Every instinct in his body screamed to stay quiet, to not even breathe too hard. It was like being in the presence of something ancient, something that had waited a long time to be seen. He didn't know how long he stared. Hours. Maybe. He passed in and out of shallow, terrified sleep, eyes flicking open every time a branch snapped or the wind gusted. But every time, that shape was there, still. Watching that at some point, dawn broke. Pale light filtered into the tent, softening. The world. Luis waited another full hour before unzipping the flap. Nothing was there. No. Tracks. No sign of anything. Just cold ashes where the fire had been and a dead silence in the trees. He packed up fast, hands shaking, skipping coffee or breakfast. Every rustle in the brush made him spin around. His legs ached from tensing all night. By the time he reached the car, he was sweating despite the chill. He drove without stopping until he was back in Fredericksburg. Didn't look back once. Didn't care if he left something behind, but the buzzing didn't stop. That low hum and his ears followed him back to Austin. And at night, in his apartment, when everything else is silent, he hears the FOOTFALLS. Soft, measured, circling, outside his bedroom door, and sometimes he swears he sees those same red eyes glowing through the crack at the bottom, waiting, watching, just like they did on the rock. Luis doesn't go hiking anymore. He doesn't even leave the lights off. But no matter how bright he makes the apartment, the shadows still come. And sometimes, only sometimes, they move. It started like any other hike. Clay Maddox wasn't the kind of man who scared easy. He'd trekked the Rockies solo, slept under the northern lights in Alaska, and once spent 3 days off-grid in the Gila wilderness with nothing but a knife and a water straw. 54, lean as a whip, sunburned and stubborn, Clay moved like the trails owed him their secrets. Buzzard's Bluff, though, that was just supposed to be a day trip. Nothing but a name on a weathered sign nailed to a cedar at the trailhead. Outside Junction, Texas. A quick loop in the Edwards Plateau, rough limestone trails weaving through mesquite and live oak, a couple dry creeks, and plenty of vultures circling in slow spirals overhead. Nothing special. He hadn't even planned to go off trail. The weather was dry, air sharp with cedar and sun-baked stone. Clay had parked at the lot by 9 a.m., pack light, just a couple protein bars, a half-gallon jug, and his old Petzl headlamp clipped to his belt. The first couple hours were routine, tight switchbacks, cactus bloom here and there, buzzards overhead like kites caught on invisible string. But sometime around mile 5, just past a section where the path forked but both sides led. Nowhere according to his GPS, he spotted it. The ground just fell away, not like a gentle slope. No warning. 1 second, hard rock and dead grass. The next, a dark, circular mouth maybe 6 feet wide and ringed with jagged stone. A sinkhole, he guessed. The bluff had plenty of karst beneath it, that soft, soluble limestone prone to collapsing into caverns and shafts. But this one wasn't marked. Not on the map, not in the ranger logs, not on any forum he'd skimmed that morning over coffee. Curious, he edged closer. It wasn't fresh. The rim had worn edges, and tufts of grass leaned into it as if trying to peek in. Clay crouched beside it, listening for running water or wind. Nothing. Just a stillness that seemed heavier than the air around it. He unhooked the lamp from his belt, thumbed it on, and leaned over the lip. The beam vanished into black. No floor, no glint off stone, no echo. It swallowed light like a mouth. Clay whistled. Nothing came back, not even a whisper. It wasn't natural. Even the deepest shafts gave something back. A flutter of bats, a clatter of pebbles, but this one just took. He hesitated. Then, on impulse, he let go of the HEADLAMP. It dropped clean and quiet, beam spinning until it blinked out. Counted. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, 4. Then something threw it back. It didn't rise slowly, didn't tumble or bounce. It launched. Straight up out of the black and clattered to the ground beside him like it had been fired from a slingshot. Still lit. The beam shook in his hand as he picked it up, dirt smeared across the lens like a fingerprint. Clay's gut clenched. It wasn't wind. It wasn't some fluke of pressure or draft. He'd spent a lifetime around caves, and nothing he'd ever known could do that. He should have walked away. That would have been the smart move. But Clay had never been smart when it came to his pride. So he pulled the coil of nylon rope from his pack, 60 feet, tied it off to a cedar trunk, and lowered himself into the shaft. At first, the descent was clean. Rough limestone wide. Enough for his shoulders. The headlamp lit moss and water stains. 10 feet, 20, 30. It began to curve inwards like the throat of a bottle. By 45 feet, he had to wedge his boots against the sides and shimmy. Then he reached the bottom. It wasn't a pit. It opened into a chamber, a huge one. The rope stopped just short of the floor, but he could swing and drop the last 6 feet without much risk. When his boots hit the stone, the impact echoed like a rifle shot. That's when he realized the scale. The chamber stretched wide, irregular, the edges lost in shadow. He turned in a slow circle, lamp beam slicing the dark. There were bones, scattered, small, too small for deer or goat. Piles of them near the edges, some brittle and white, some still dark with decay. He backed toward the center. His mouth was dry. He reached for his water without looking, took a long pull, and wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. That's when he heard it. Breathing. Not his. Not the shallow pant of a scared man. This was slow, deliberate, just outside the light's edge. Something big. Clay raised the lamp. Nothing. Just more darkness. He turned slowly, more breathing. Closer now. Still unseen. He spoke. "Who's there?" The breathing stopped. For a long minute, the silence was louder than any scream. Then came the click, soft, like bone on stone. Then another. Then dozens. Tiny clicks, like fingernails. They moved toward him from all sides. He ran. The chambers. Floor was uneven, littered with loose stones and slippery moss. He sprinted blindly, beam bouncing, light cutting swaths through nothing. But behind him, the clicks grew louder. And beneath them, something else, a dragging sound, wet and slow. Like meat pulled across gravel. He reached a wall. It was sheer. He spun, light raised. The creatures weren't fully visible. But what he saw he never forgot. Pale skin, stretched thin. Eyes glowing faint red. Limbs too long, fingers too many, teeth like pebbles embedded in tar. Dozens of them. Blinking in the dark. Watching him, smiling. He backed against the wall. "Stay back," he warned, voice breaking. One stepped into the light. The lamp flickered. Clay lunged forward, swinging the headlamp like a club. It passed through air. The thing was gone. No footsteps. No sound. Then something gripped his ankle. He screamed. It yanked. He fell. Something cold and jointed crawled up his leg. He kicked, thrashed, hit the lamp against the floor. The light snapped off. Everything vanished. In the dark. The breathing surrounded him. And then silence. When the rescue team found his rope 2 days later, still tied tight to the cedar, they assumed he'd fallen. They never saw a body. They lowered a drone into the shaft. It lost signal at 40 feet. Rangers marked the hole, sealed it with cement and steel. Locals whispered about Buzzard's Bluff, but it never made the papers. Just another hiker who vanished. Only one clue. Remained. His HEADLAMP. Found on the cedar trunk 2 weeks later, blinking weakly. Smudged with dirt. And blood. They were halfway through the Dry Creek Loop when the sun started dipping, throwing long orange slashes across the scrubland. It was the kind of place where your shadow stretched too far, and the wind always felt like it was whispering something just out of earshot. The trail was barely more than a dirt path, curving through tangled brush, clusters of cactus, and the occasional patch of twisted mesquite trees that clawed at the sky like gnarled fingers. Sarah had picked the trail because it was marked lightly. Trafficked. Kevin had agreed because it was their anniversary, and she said she wanted something quiet and Texas real. Dry Creek delivered that. A place where silence wasn't peaceful, just full of things that chose not to make noise. They'd parked off County Road 112, tossed a small pack over Kevin's shoulder, and started in around 2 p.m. By 5, the shadows were beginning to lengthen, and the temperature had dropped just enough to bring a chill to Sarah's arms. She pulled her flannel tighter and quickened her pace, keeping close to Kevin, who had slowed to snap a photo of a prickly pear bloom lit orange by the dying light. He said something about how strange it was that this patch of trail didn't seem familiar. He'd hiked it years ago, during college, and swore it looped back toward the ridge much earlier. It should have turned by now, he muttered, squinting ahead. We've gone too far, or the map's wrong. Sarah didn't respond at first. She was looking at something. A circle of mesquite trees stood just off the trail. They weren't like the others, not spread out and wild, but clustered tight. Trunks bending toward each other like they'd been leaning in to whisper for the last 50 years. Their branches tangled above, casting a crooked shadow onto the dry ground beneath. The light around them was off, too dim. Too still. Then came the sound. Laughter. High, bright, echoing just enough to sound like it was coming from behind the trees. It rose and fell like a skipping rope chant, and Sarah turned sharply toward it, eyes searching. Kevin froze. Did you hear that? Yeah, she said slowly, her eyes narrowing. Kids? There aren't any kids out here, Kevin said, glancing at the map again like it would offer something comforting. We haven't passed another car since the highway turnoff. More laughter. This time, it was closer, and it wasn't right. Something about the pitch. The way it stretched too long on the last note, like someone pretending to laugh. A bad impression of a child's voice. Kevin took a step toward the mesquite circle. Sarah grabbed his wrist. Don't, she said. He looked back. At her, it could be someone lost. She didn't say anything. She just pointed. In the fine, sandy dust leading into the grove were footprints. Not boot prints. Not sneakers. Small. Barefoot. Human. Clear toes and heels. Too many of them going in a dozen directions. Like a dozen barefoot children had run. Circles under those twisted trees. And never come out. They stared at them for a while, not moving, not breathing loud. Kevin finally broke the silence. Let's keep moving. Get back before dark. But the trail ahead was almost gone, swallowed by thorns and old roots. And the way back seemed longer than they remembered. When they turned around, the sun was nearly gone, slipping behind. A ridge to the west and a thick hush had settled over the brush. No birds, no crickets. Just wind. No, not wind. Breathing. Sarah heard it first. It came from behind them, just beyond the mesquite trees. Not heavy breathing, not labored, shallow, rhythmic, like something trying very hard not to be heard. Or something that didn't need to breathe much. Let's go, she said. They didn't. Run, not at first. They kept their pace steady, controlled, fast walking over loose stones and around brush clusters. Kevin kept turning to check the path, but it was like the trail was changing behind them. Trees looked different. The angles were wrong. A big flat rock they passed an hour ago now sat to their right instead of their left. And then the laughter came again, farther this time, but echoing around them from different directions. Surrounding them. Kevin pulled out his phone, flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the half-dark like a blade. Map's not loading, he said. No bars. Keep it on, Sarah whispered. Just keep moving. They walked until the trail opened up again into a wide clearing. The ground was flatter here, easier to breathe. Kevin scanned the edges with his light. More mesquite trees lined the clearing, thicker here, crowding the perimeter like a natural fence. But there was something else. Shapes, figures, low to the ground. Sarah took a step back, heart hammering. They were sitting 5 small shapes, children. Their heads were down as if they were drawing in the dirt. One of them looked up. Her face was pale, the skin tight over her cheekbones too smooth. Her eyes were solid black, no whites. Just shining, reflective darkness. She smiled, and the others looked up, all at once, not blinking. Not moving. Just watching. Then they stood. In unison. The one in front, the girl, tilted her head slowly, like she was studying Sarah. And then came the sound. Again. Laughter. But it didn't come from their mouths. It echoed around the clearing, louder this time, sharper. It felt like it was inside Kevin's head. Sarah clamped her hands over her ears. Kevin backed up, tripped on a root, and dropped the flashlight. When he picked it back up, the clearing was empty. Every shape gone. No footsteps in the dirt. Just the trees creaking slightly in the wind, or maybe not wind. They didn't speak again for a while. They just kept moving, picking their way through thorn and dust until they found the edge of the ridge. The road was down below, headlights in the distance. Civilization, reality, something real. They scrambled down, scraped in soaring hearts, pounding. When they reached the truck, Kevin fumbled the keys, dropped them twice before jamming them into the ignition. The engine roared to life like salvation. As they pulled away, Sarah looked out the passenger window. The trailhead sign was gone. In its place was a rusted post, bent and blackened, no lettering left. But behind it, just beyond the first line of brush, stood the girl again. Barefoot. Smiling. And just as they turned onto the highway, Sarah saw her lift one hand and wave. That night, they didn't talk much. Just sat in their motel room in San Saba, lights on, TV playing low. Kevin stared at the wall. Sarah rubbed her arms like she was still cold, even under the blanket. At 3:17 a.m., Sarah sat up suddenly. There was laughter. Faint. From the motel window. She pulled the curtain aside. No one there. Just dusty footprints on the sill. Barefoot. Small. And too many to count. Emily never liked hiking alone, but that day at Pedernales Falls, something about the sky and the slow roll of the river made her take the risk. She'd been through a rough month, a breakup that left her gutted and a job layoff that felt personal, even though it wasn't. So when she pulled off Ranch Road 2766 and laced up her boots, she told herself it was just her and the rocks and the water for a while. Clean air, cold river, silence. Pedernales Falls was quiet that morning, almost too quiet. The usual dog walkers and tourists were missing, which she chalked up to the sticky heat and looming gray clouds. The river, though low, was still flowing, snaking through limestone and moss like a quiet breath. Emily climbed down near one of the lesser-known spots, a shaded cove with ferns and slick stones. She took off her shoes, let her feet dangle in the shallow water, and closed her eyes. She doesn't remember falling asleep, but when she opened her eyes, the shadows had grown long and the air had turned thick. She stood quickly, heart thudding. It was only a nap, probably less than an hour, but the sky had changed, and she felt, not watched exactly, but aware that something had shifted. She chalked it up to nerves, gathered her stuff, and made her way back up the trail. Her boots felt heavier. That's what stuck with her. Not in a metaphorical way, they physically felt heavier. Squishy too, like she'd stepped into muck. But she hadn't. She looked down and noticed brown stains near the solace. Mud, maybe? It hadn't rained in weeks though, and the banks where she'd sat were dry. She didn't remember stepping in anything. Still, she scraped them against a rock and moved on. She didn't realize until the drive home that she smelled like wet earth. It clung to her skin, sour and sweet at the same time, almost like decaying leaves. She figured it was from sitting by the river too long. That smell sticks to you sometimes. It didn't fade after her shower. Not completely. That night, she curled up on the couch with a frozen dinner and a cheap glass of wine. The apartment was small but cozy, a rental west of Austin, all exposed brick and vintage fixtures. Her cat, Oliver, paced at the window, tail twitching. He kept staring at the patio door, meowing low. Emily chuckled. There's nothing out there, dummy. But when she stood to check, she noticed muddy smears on the tile. At first, she thought she'd track them in herself, but the shapes were wrong. Not boot prints, not even shoes. Bare feet. Small, slender, like a child's. And they weren't there before. She wiped them up quickly, brushing it off. Maybe she stepped in something in the parking lot. Maybe the muddy spots were from earlier and she just didn't see them. But something inside her stomach turned cold. That night, she woke up to the sound of water. Not dripping, running. Steady stream. She padded to the bathroom, heart sinking. The shower was on. Steam rolled out of the crack beneath the door. She hesitated. Hello? She whispered like an idiot. She was alone. There was no one to answer. She swung open the door. Shower knob was turned all the way. Water ran cold. No fogged mirror. No signs of heat. Just running water and the faint smell of river rot. She shut it off. Tried to laugh it off. Old pipes. Maybe she'd bumped the handle somehow earlier. But her hands shook as she brushed her. Teeth. The next morning, there were more footprints. Muddy, bare. Leading from the back patio door, across the kitchen, and stopping in front of her bedroom. She stared at them for a long time, her breath tight. They hadn't been there when she went to bed. She cleaned them without thinking, scrubbing hard, mumbling to herself like someone staving off madness. She changed the locks that afternoon. Bought a camera too, one of those motion-detecting ones. Set it up facing the kitchen. That night, Oliver refused to come inside. He hissed at the door, back arched, eyes wide. She finally gave up trying and left a blanket for him on the patio. She barely slept out. The camera pinged at 3:11 a.m. She sat up, adrenaline hitting like ice water. She reached for her phone, hand slick. The alert had a clip, just 10 seconds. She pressed play. Nothing moved at first. Then, the faucet handle in the sink slowly turned. The water dribbled, then gushed. Then the screen went black. She shot out of bed and ran to the kitchen. The sink was dry. No signs of anything. But she could smell it now, that same wet, earthy stink from the falls. Stronger, deeper, like something had been sitting in her pipes, festering. She checked the patio. Locked, but the glass was smeared not with mud, with fingerprints. Small, long, dragging fingerprints. She stopped going into the kitchen at night. She started sleeping with the lights on. Her friend said she was stressed, probably just residual anxiety from the breakup and job mess. Her therapist doubled her meditation assignments, but none of them had seen the footprints. None of them had stood in a room where the air turned thick and damp, where shadows moved even when you stood still. Emily decided to go back. She had to. Maybe she'd stepped on something sacred, disturbed something. That's how these things worked, right? You go to the place, you apologize, you make peace. She drove back to Pedernales Falls on a gray morning, parked in the same spot, hiked to the same cove. The place looked wrong, smaller. The ferns were limp and dark. The river sounded off, too fast for such shallow water. She knelt by the spot where she'd sat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to take anything. If something followed me, please go back. I didn't ask for it." The air didn't shift. Nothing answered. She waited. An hour passed. Nothing. Relieved, foolishly, she stood to leave. That's when she saw them. Footprints. In the wet silt just behind her. Small, bare, leading from the trees to where she sat. And stopping there, but none leading away. Emily backed. Up, her heart screamed in her chest. She turned fast, slipped on a slick patch of algae, hit her knee hard. She scrambled to her feet and ran. She never heard footsteps behind her, but she felt them. That night, she deleted the camera app. It only showed the water. Faucets, showers, bathtub drains burping up dark silt. And that night, she heard something. New laughter. Not joyous. Not playful. Gurgling, wet, like it came through a throat filled with river muck. It echoed in her pipes, in her walls. In the hiss of the sink when she brushed her teeth. In the rush of the toilet. She unplugged everything. Shut off the water at the main, but the sound never stopped. A week later, her landlord came by after she stopped answering calls. Found the apartment soaked, all the taps running. The place stinking of algae and something worse, rot. And not food rot, body rot. Emily's phone was found beside the bed, her boots near the door, her shower curtain torn down. They never found her, only the footprints. Small, bare. Leading to the river. And never coming back. They said not to whistle. It was the first thing the old man at the general store told Travis when he bought the trail map. Don't whistle in Ghost Valley. Not up high, not down low. Not at all. He'd said it like he was giving advice. About bears or rattlesnakes, like it was something Travis should have taken seriously. But Travis had just nodded politely, scribbled something on his receipt, and walked out with a grin on his face, already forgetting it by the time he turned the key in his Jeep. He didn't believe in superstitions, never had. The world was full of real dangers, flash floods, twisted ankles, dehydration, but ghosts? Spirits that answered whistles in the dark? That belonged in movies, not in the scrubby hills and shallow ravines of central Texas. Ghost Valley Trail wasn't marked on most official maps. It was carved out of a disused cattle route just west of Junction, near a stretch of limestone cliffs and dry creek beds that locals avoided. It didn't even look like much, just a narrow dirt path winding down into a low bowl between ridgelines, dotted with oak and mesquite trees. But Travis wasn't out here for scenery. He was hiking solo, trying to unplug after a messy breakup, and this trail offered silence. The kind of quiet where you could feel your own heartbeat in your ears and your boots crunching on sun-baked soil. The first few miles were uneventful. The trail dipped and climbed, winding around brittle brush and chunks of rock that crumbled underfoot. He passed a collapsed fence post, rusted barbed wire coiled like a dead snake at its base. There was no wind, not even the hum of insects. Just the heat pressing down and the dry rasp of his breath. He whistled without thinking, a soft, rising two-note melody, something his dad used to do while working on old trucks. It floated out of him naturally, like breathing. He barely noticed. The silence afterward. Then something whistled back. It was faint at first, a mimic of the same tune, like someone deep in the valley had picked it up and tried it on, only they didn't quite know how to shape the notes. It came back slower, lower, and off-key. Travis stopped mid-step, blinked sweat from his eyes, and turned in a slow circle. There was no one. He shook it off. Could have been wind across a rock face, or birds, even though he hadn't seen or heard a single one all morning. He whistled. Again, sharper this time. A challenge. The answer came faster. Closer. It was the same tune, but stretched in strange places, like someone with a damaged throat trying to imitate human sound. A hiccup between the notes. A wetness. Travis felt something cold slide down the back of his neck, like sweat that had turned to ice. The air around him felt wrong. Not cold, not hot, just hollow. He muttered, "All right." Real funny, even though he knew no one was around. He hadn't seen a car at the trailhead, hadn't passed another hiker. Still, he spun around again, scanning the scraggly brush and rock outcrops for movement. Nothing moved. He didn't whistle again, just started walking faster. The trail narrowed and dipped into a gulch, the brush thicker here, the sky narrower. Every step crunched louder, and he realized he was dragging his left foot slightly, like something deep in his nerves didn't want him to make noise anymore. He stopped again. Hands on hips and listened. No wind. No bugs. No birds. Then, the whistle again. Right behind him. He spun so hard he nearly fell. Nothing. Not even a shadow. The valley swallowed sound. That was the only explanation, he told himself. Some weird acoustic effect, an echo that bounced off the rocks in strange ways. He'd read about places like that. Canyons where you could whisper and hear yourself from miles away. That had to be it. Still, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the knife he kept in the side pocket. It was small, a camping knife, barely 6 inches, but it felt better than nothing. He held it loosely in his palm and started back. Up the trail. He didn't remember the climb being so steep. The path curved and twisted tighter now, as if the trail itself was folding in on him. He kept walking, lips pressed shut. Sweat stung his eyes. Something shifted in the corner of his vision, a flicker of movement, and he turned just in time to see a figure dart behind a stand of twisted junipers. "Hey!" he shouted, throat raw. No answer. He moved closer, slowly, knife raised. The trees were dense here, but low to the ground, easy to see through. He parted them with one hand and found nothing. No footprints. No broken branches. No one. He stood still, listening to his own breath heaving in his chest. Then the whistle came again. But this time, it didn't stop. It just kept going, a long, slow rise that didn't belong in a human chest. It went too long, too smooth, like something with no lungs, just endless breath. It came from above and behind, and when he turned, he saw the outline of something at the edge of the trail. Not a person. Not quite Dot. It was tall and thin and pale. Its face was wrong. No features, just indentations where eyes should be and a mouth that opened too wide. No teeth, just dark. And the sound came from it, not whistling now, but something like a pipe being pushed through flesh. A wet, rattling hiss. Travis ran. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just ran, knife forgotten somewhere along the path. The trail shifted under him, rocks loose, the slope sharper than before. He tripped once, skinned his palms, got back up with gravel embedded in his knees. He heard it following, not footsteps, something softer. A dragging. A whisper that became another whistle, the exact same tune again. Too close now. When he burst out of the trees and saw the trailhead, his legs nearly gave out. The Jeep sat in the sun, baking like a brick oven. He stumbled toward it, flung the door open, slammed it behind him, and locked it without thinking. The sound stopped. The whistle stopped. He sat in silence, panting, staring out the dusty windshield. Nothing moved, but when he looked at the passenger seat, he saw something resting there. Just a stone, smooth, gray, oval, about the size of a flattened orange. It hadn't been there before. It was wet. He didn't remember unlocking the door. He drove straight out of Ghost Valley. Didn't stop at the general store. Didn't speak to anyone. Drove through 2 towns before he pulled into a gas station and threw up in the parking lot. The next night, in the motel room as he tried to fall asleep, he heard something. A whistle. Soft. Wrong. From the bathroom. He sat up, heart jackhammering, and stared at the door. It was cracked an inch. The light was off. The whistling grew louder. He grabbed his bag and left. Slept in his Jeep. Over the next week, it followed him. In a gas station restroom in Sonora. In a roadside diner where the waitress froze mid-step, eyes wide. In his own apartment, 200 miles away. He'd walk into the kitchen and see the faucet dripping, or muddy footprints across the tile, or hear it. That damn 2-note tune coming from inside the vents behind the shower curtain, just outside his bedroom window. He stopped whistling forever, but it didn't, because Ghost Valley doesn't let go. And when you call it, when you whistle, something answers. And it keeps answering. Closer, every time. They'd driven out past Mason toward the Llano River Basin, where the hill country rolls gently and the sky stretches black and bottomless at night. Just 4 friends looking to escape the noise of Austin for a weekend of beer, smoke, and stories. Under the stars. They weren't kids, not anymore, 30-somethings, old enough to know better but still hungry for the dumb thrills of youth. Chris had brought his guitar, Tara had brought the weed, and the couple, Kevin and Jules, had brought enough food to last a week, even though they'd only planned to stay 2 nights. They parked the Jeep and Kevin's old Tacoma near a clearing. By the river, a place Chris said his uncle used to camp decades ago. No cell service, no GPS, just old dirt roads that twisted like tree roots and finally gave out at the edge of nowhere. The first night was the usual mix of beers and dumb songs, smoke curling up into the cold air, everyone wrapped in hoodies and thick flannel. They pitched 2 tents, one for the couple, one for Chris and Tara, though Tara had already claimed she wasn't sleeping with a guy who smells like canned chili and weed. Laughter echoed out across the rocks and brush, the kind that feels bigger under a sky like that. Coyotes howled somewhere far off, and an owl hooted from a twisted pecan tree, but no one thought twice about it. The campfire crackled low, casting warm light that danced across their faces and reached out across the dry grass in long, flickering arms. They'd ringed it with stones, old and blackened from years of use, and Chris swore one of them still had a heat mark from a lightning strike. But it was Jules who noticed it first. She was sitting cross-legged in her camping chair, eyes half-lidded, from the wine and the cold, when she leaned forward and frowned at the shadows. "There's one more than there should be," she said, not alarmed, just puzzled. Kevin chuckled. "You can count shadows now?" "No, look, one for each of us." "And then that one, by the far side of the circle. Nobody's standing there, but that shadow is." They all looked. She was right. The firelight painted 4 long, dark shadows. Behind them, stretching toward the mesquite trees, and then a 5th. It was right on the edge of the circle, between Tara and Chris, not attached to anyone. Just a tall, vaguely human shape cast across the ground, like someone standing right. They're beside them, but when you looked, really looked, there was no one there. Chris stood up, squinting. "Maybe it's the angle. Or, I dunno, a tree?" "No tree that close," Tara said, and it moved. They all watched. The shadow didn't move like the others. It didn't flicker or shift when the fire popped. It stood still, like it was watching. And then, as if responding to their attention, it took a step. Not backward, not away from the light, but sideways around the ring of chairs. Slow. Deliberate. Like a person circling a campfire in silence. Kevin laughed nervously. "Okay, who's messing around?" "Chris? You do some projection trick? Or something? Hell no, man. I don't even know how I'd do that." "No light behind us either," Jules whispered. "Just the fire." "That's it." And then the thing kept moving. Another step. The shadow slid along the dirt, circling closer, but the air stayed still. No footfalls, no leaves crunching. Just that dry Texas wind brushing the fire smoke in little waves. They didn't speak for a while, just watched it. It didn't rush. It didn't disappear. It just kept circling, slow, steady, dragging behind it a sense of something horribly patient. Chris finally tossed a log on the fire, and the sudden flame flared up bright. The shadows stretched long and wide, and, for a second, the extra one vanished. Tara exhaled hard and half laughed. Okay, that was seriously freaky. But then, as the fire settled again, the shadow came back, not where it had vanished, but directly behind Kevin's chair. And now it wasn't stretched flat along the ground anymore. It rose up, vertical, along the boulders behind them. The silhouette of a man tall, too thin, the head slightly cocked to one side. Kevin stood up fast and turned. The hell, man? There was nothing. Just the stone, the night, and the smell of ash and beer. That night, none of them slept well. They all heard different things: snapping twigs, soft breathing outside the tent, the sound of a zipper being slowly drawn down and then back up again. Chris swore he heard humming. Jules said something brushed her foot inside the sleeping bag, but when morning came, the woods looked normal. Nothing out of place. Just deer tracks near the river and raccoon. Prints by the trash bag. They almost packed up, almost. But no one wanted to be the first to suggest it. No one wanted to admit they were spooked by a trick of FIRELIGHT. That second night, they built the fire higher. Made sure there was no mistaking anyone's shadow. Tara even took photos on her phone, trying to prove it was a weird trick of the flame. But around midnight, when they were half drunk and singing off-key, the shadow came back. No fanfare this time. It was just there, behind Jules this time, outlined clearly against a big patch of dirt. Not moving now, just standing. Closer than before. Kevin stood up and stomped toward the spot. This isn't funny anymore. Whoever's out there, just come out. You got your scare. The shadow didn't flinch. But as Kevin stepped toward it, his own shadow overlapped with it and then vanished. Just for a second. Like the fire forgot he was there. Tara screamed. Chris grabbed his flashlight. and swept the area. Nothing. Just the trees and rocks and the sound of the river murmuring far away. They put out the fire early that night. Sat in their tents with lights on, talking low, trying to laugh it off. Around 2 a.m., Jules heard the rustling first, then the soft scratching. It wasn't on the tent walls. It was underneath. Something dragging beneath the floor of the tent. A slow, scraping movement, like claws across canvas. She whispered Kevin's name. He didn't answer. She reached over and felt the empty space beside her. Cold sleeping bag. No warmth. She unzipped the tent flap and looked out. Kevin was standing, barefoot near the dead fire, staring down at the ashes. The wind tugged at his shirt. She called to him. He didn't turn. She stepped out and then saw it. A second shadow rising behind him. Not cast by the fire, because there was no fire. Just moonlight. The thing behind him stretched up and possibly tall, its arms long and crooked, its head bent like it couldn't quite balance. And it leaned forward into him, like it was trying on a coat. Jules screamed. Chris and Tara came running from their tent, flashlights waving wildly. The light hit Kevin, and the shadow behind him melted away like ink dropped in water. He turned. His eyes were wide. It was whispering. They left at dawn. No breakfast. No packing. Just threw the gear in the bed of the truck and peeled off down the dirt road, brushing branches and knocking over stones as they went. They didn't talk about it again. Not for months, but Chris never went camping again. Tara moved out of state. Jules wouldn't sleep without a nightlight. And Kevin? Well, something was wrong with Kevin. He started standing in dark rooms too long. Started whispering to himself in corners. Once, Jules caught him staring at a blank wall, his own shadow stretching across the floor. When she flipped the light on, he looked startled, like he'd been somewhere else entirely. That was a year ago. Kevin disappeared last month. Cops found his truck abandoned in the exact same clearing. Fire pit still warm. 2 sets of footprints circling it, but only one ever walked away. Thomas never meant to hike that far off the main trail. He wasn't a reckless man. He was the kind of guy who charged his phone before even thinking about stepping into the woods, who double-checked the water filter, who tied a backup pair of laces to his pack just in case. Everything in his life was organized, cautious, deliberate, which made it all the more unsettling that something pulled him off course that morning like an invisible hook tugging at the back of his skull. Pine Glen Nature Preserve in central Texas wasn't especially notorious. No campfire legends or ghost tours. Just a modest sprawl of forested hills, shallow creeks, and barely kept trails that only the locals really used. The kind of place you went when you needed to get away from notifications and noise. Thomas went often. He said the stillness helped him hear his own thoughts. But that weekend, the silence had something else in it. It started around mid-morning on Saturday. He had planned to do a 9-mile loop and be back to the trailhead by dusk. Weather was perfect. He'd brought his gear, snacks, a half-charged satellite beacon just in case. He'd already passed the creek crossing and was about 2 miles deep when he stopped at a ridge to drink water and adjust his boots. That's when he heard it the first time, a voice, very faint, calling from deeper in the woods. Double quotes, help. Please, help me. He froze, not because of the plea, but because of the voice. It was his? Not like a coincidence or a close match. It was his voice exactly. Same tone, same rasp he got when he'd been walking for too long without water. Same panic that clung to his throat that time he fell off his bike at 12 and cracked a rib. It was unmistakable. And he knew, down to the bones in his feet, that he had not spoken. He waited, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No animals. No rustle of underbrush. Just wind drifting slow and heavy through the oaks. "Help," it said again. Thomas turned toward it without thinking. His boots crunched over dried pine needles, and his breath caught in his throat. He wanted to call out to say who's there, but something about using his voice felt wrong. Like if he spoke, it would answer with more than just his words. So he walked, slow at first, then faster. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in the paranormal. His dad had been a steel worker and his mom a librarian, science and facts, and first aid. But still, some animal part of him knew something was off. His ears prickled. The hair on his neck stood up. He walked until he lost the trail and didn't notice that every 10 or 20 minutes, the voice would come again. Always his, always the same. "Help, please, help me." Sometimes it came from behind, sometimes far to the left, sometimes from dead ahead. And always it sounded just out of reach, not far enough to be miles away, but not close enough to pinpoint, like it lived somewhere in the middle space between here and there. Thomas turned on his GPS. No signal. He checked his map. Nothing matched. The landscape had grown strange, not because the trees were unfamiliar, but because they all looked too similar. He could have sworn he passed the same gnarled oak stump 3 times. And the moss, that pale green creeping moss, seemed to cover every trunk, even though it hadn't earlier. He marked a tree with his knife. Just a simple X, walked a few hundred yards and turned around. The same X was on the next tree he passed, then again, and again. That's when the voice changed. It didn't say help anymore. Now it whispered. It murmured in his tone, in his cadence. But the words were things Thomas had never said in his life. Things like, "I'm so cold down here," and "Don't let it take your face," and "You should never have stepped off the trail." By mid-afternoon, the sun had begun to vanish behind the clouds, though the forecast had promised clear skies all day. The light thinned. Shadows grew longer and wrong. He checked his watch. The screen was black. So was his phone. The trees had closed in tighter now, like a hallway with no doors. And in every direction, he kept hearing the soft shush of leaves, like something pacing him just out of sight. Something mimicking his footsteps, matching him beat for beat, pausing when he paused. He spun in place more than once, thinking he'd catch whatever was behind him, a person, a mountain lion, something, but the woods were still, and then the laughing started, not loud, not playful, just a dry, breathless chuckle, his chuckle right in his ear, so close he swatted the air. It faded instantly, as if drawn back into the trees. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream, but his legs wouldn't move. Not fully. Something inside him, some fragment of reason, was still trying to make sense of it, still trying to apply logic like a bandage on an amputation. Thomas found a clearing just before dusk and decided to set up camp. Not because it was safe, but because the alternative was walking deeper into something he didn't understand. He built a fire, ate a protein bar, drank half his water. The voice didn't speak for a while. The woods were hushed like a church before a funeral, but he could feel the air vibrating, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. At midnight, the fire sputtered, and he heard it again. This time, the voice didn't come from one direction. It came from all around, from the branches, the roots, the soil, from inside his own chest. "Thomas," it said, "let me out." He stood, stumbled backward, eyes wide. "Who's there?" He yelled, breaking his own rule. His voice cracked, and the echo that answered was not his. It was lower, wet-sounding, like lungs, half full of water. And it laughed again. The trees swayed even though there was no wind. "I'm you," it said, "the part you left here." He didn't understand, but in some corner of his brain, something did. A childhood memory surfaced, barely a moment, of a field trip to Pine Glen, of wandering away from the group, of falling into a narrow crevice behind a cedar tree, of screaming for what felt like hours until his voice broke, of being pulled out by rangers with flashlights, of telling his parents everything was fine, that he hadn't been scared, but he had been scared. So scared he'd buried the day-old Dot Thomas turned in place, trying to find the source. But the trees had shifted again. There were no stars, no moonlight, only the circle of dying firelight, and the cold whisper of the thing in the dark. "You left me here," it said. "You walked away, but I never did." The ground cracked beneath him, soft like it had turned to mulch. He stepped back, but every direction felt wrong, like the world was folding in, and then he saw himself, standing across the clearing, just inside the line of trees, same clothes, same face, but not quite right. His eyes were wide and glassy. His mouth hung open, and the expression on his face was pure agony, like he'd been screaming forever and only now remembered how to stop. The thing lifted a hand and pointed at Thomas. "You don't belong anymore," it said in a voice that wasn't a voice. He ran. Branches tore at his arms. The wood spun and stretched, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. He ran until the forest thinned and light broke through. He stumbled back onto the main trail at dawn, fell to his knees, sobbing. A ranger found him that afternoon, half dehydrated and rambling about voices in the trees. They airlifted him out. He didn't tell them everything. Who would believe him? He never went back to Pine Glen, but sometimes, especially in the quiet hours before dawn, he still hears it. That voice, his voice, from just outside the window, repeating his name in a hollow whisper, begging to come back in. It was the last weekend in October when Jimmy Baker, his cousin Todd, and their old friend Ray took the trip out to Dimeback Hollow, that forgotten stretch of pine woods south of Gorman, Texas, where the trails were nothing more than deer paths. And the only sounds you'd hear were wind through needles and the occasional distant bark of a coyote. The kind of place where the trees pressed in tight, casting long shadows by mid-afternoon and swallowing all light by dusk. Jimmy had been there once when he was 14. His dad brought him squirrel hunting, and they'd found an old logging road covered in brambles. His dad called it a good spot to disappear into, which seemed funny at the time. Less funny now. They came with beer, jerky, and sleeping bags, intent on getting drunk around the fire and forgetting about the crap back home, dead-end jobs, divorces, rent overdue. Todd brought a .22 rifle, just in case, and Ray, being the quiet type, carried his camera and said he was going to take pictures of natural decay for his art show, though no one ever saw his art. They reached the clearing by the creek around 4 and had the fire going by 5. The wind was dry and carried the faint rot of leaves breaking down, but they were used to that. They were sitting around, swapping stories, when Jimmy noticed the log dot. It sat maybe 20 feet from the fire, hollowed out and black on the inside like something had burned it years ago and left it to collapse in on itself. Pine needles had gathered inside, making it look like a rat's nest. Todd threw a beer can at it around 7, and the sound echoed deeper than it should have, like the log was connected to something underground. "That thing's big enough to crawl inside," Todd said, laughing. "Bet there's a fat-ass raccoon living in there." Jimmy didn't laugh. Something about the way the firelight flickered across the log's opening gave him pause, like it was watching him instead of the other way around. He shook it off and cracked another beer. Around 9, Ray wandered off to take pictures. Jimmy and Todd were talking about old girlfriends when they heard rustling. Not the usual squirrel shuffling kind. This was louder, heavier. It came from the log. Todd sat up, rifle resting on his knees, and squinted at the shape. Probably that raccoon. Gonna scare the hell out of him. Then the log moved. Not much. Just a shift in shadow, like something inside had leaned forward. The rustling grew louder, followed by a thump against the inside of the wood, like a boot kicking from within. Todd stood and raised the rifle. "Hey!" he shouted, voice cracking. "Get out of there, stupid thing." No response. Then came the Fijiana. Sound again scraping, wet and slow, like something dragging its belly along splinters. Todd clicked the safety off and stepped closer. Jimmy stood too, but didn't follow. His gut was turning, tightening with the old instinct that told him this wasn't right. The log was long dead, half-rotten, and too narrow for anything big. Todd crouched down, gun aimed at the hole, and that's when it happened. Something crawled out. At first Jimmy thought it was a raccoon, just like they said. A big one, maybe rabbit, but it didn't move like any animal he'd seen. Its arms, because it had arms, were too long, the elbows bending wrong, pulling its thin body out like it had to dislocate to squeeze through. And then it stood up. Not tall, maybe 4 feet, hunched. Its skin was pale gray and wrinkled, like chewed gum left out too long. No fur, no tail. Its head hung low, mouth slack, lips torn like they'd been chewed on from the inside. And the fingers, Jesus, the fingers long and pink and too many joints, 8 of them on each hand. No claws. Just fingers, moving in the firelight like they were testing the air. Todd screamed and fired. The shot went wide, cracked a tree trunk, and sent sparks from the fire scattering. The thing didn't run. It didn't even flinch. It looked at Todd Orr. It faced him, at least, no eyes that they could see, and it opened its mouth. No sound. Just a stretch of wet, dark muscle that dripped something black onto the leaves. Jimmy grabbed Todd by the collar and dragged him back. They stumbled toward the truck, forgetting Ray was still gone. Jimmy looked back once and saw the thing walking. Toward them, not fast, just steady. Like it knew it didn't need to hurry. Ray screamed then, not far off. A raw, sudden scream that ended too quickly. Todd dropped the rifle. Jimmy didn't stop running. They reached the truck, keys in Jimmy's. Hands shaking so bad he missed the ignition twice. When it roared to life, Todd was already sobbing. They left everything behind: tents, cooler, gear, even Ray's camera. They didn't speak on the drive back. They didn't go to the cops either. What would they say? That they saw something. Crawl out of a log and watched it walk off into the woods with fingers like pink centipedes? 3 days later, Jimmy tried calling Ray. No answer. His phone rang twice, then went to static. On the 5th call, someone picked up but said nothing. Jimmy swore he heard breathing. Something wet. A week passed. Todd stopped going to work. Wouldn't answer his door. Wouldn't return texts. Jimmy finally drove over and found him sitting in the corner of his living room with the lights off, pointing the rifle at the fireplace. He kept mumbling, "It knew me, it looked at me." He was committed 2 days later. Hasn't spoken since. Jimmy never went back to Dimeback Hollow, but he dreams about it. Always the same. A log in the dark, something inside it shifting, scraping, crawling out slow. In his dreams, it speaks now. Not with words, just breath and wet sounds and fingers on skin. Last week, Jimmy found dirt on his bedroom floor. Pine needles under his pillow. No one else had a key. No windows were open. And this morning, when he opened his closet, something was crouched at the back. It didn't move. Just tilted its head and smiled without eyes. A smile he felt more than. Saw Dot, he shut the door and walked away. He hasn't opened it since. But he hears it at night, fingers tapping, waiting. They first noticed it just past mile marker 8, where the trail veered hard around a bend and the tree canopy grew thick enough to block the late afternoon sun. It was Lyle who pointed it out first, squinting up into the branches with a hand over his brow like some old-time scout. "You see that?" he asked, voice low, like he was trying not to disturb something. "What?" Denise turned, her boots grinding softly in the pine litter. She followed his gaze. There was a shape up there, hanging in the branches of a massive post oak that jutted out awkwardly over the trail like a crooked elbow. It looked at first like someone had tossed up a punching bag or maybe some kind of tarp that had snagged and bunched up in the limbs. But then the breeze came through gentle, the way it moves just before dusk, and the shape began to sway. Only it wasn't swaying like a sack. It moved like something heavier than cloth. It hung, long and limp, like a man too tired to hold himself up. One arm drooped unnaturally low, the fingers claw-like, dark against the golden light filtering through the leaves. "No rope," Lyle muttered. He stepped forward and shaded his eyes again. "It's not hanging from anything." Denise followed his step, her stomach twisted. He was right. The thing was just suspended there, several feet below the branch, not swinging from a line, not caught in vines or snagged by hooks. It just floated, hovered, like the tree itself had birthed it and didn't care to let it go. "You think it's a dummy?" she asked. Lyle didn't answer. He stepped off the trail, boots crunching on broken twigs, and made his way under the branch. Denise wanted to grab him, but her feet stayed rooted. Something about the air had shifted, like the woods were holding their breath. He was right beneath it now. Whatever it is, it's big. Bigger than a man. "Lyle, don't," and then it moved. Not from the wind, not in reaction to a squirrel or a breeze or gravity. The entire shape jerked just an inch, enough to make Denise's heart crawl into her throat. It lifted its head or something like a head toward Lyle, and the limbs bent upward slightly like a puppet pulled by unseen strings. Denise shouted his name. He backed up, his face pale, sweat breaking out across his forehead despite the chill. "Let's keep going," he said quickly, not even looking back. "Forget it. Just a tree, right? Maybe it's a weird old Halloween prank." But they both knew it wasn't. And as they walked away, Denise glanced back once, and it hadn't changed position, but she felt the heat of something watching them. All the way down the trail, they made camp farther down, past the old dry creek that only ran during flash floods, near a spot they'd used years back when they were younger, braver. Lyle didn't mention the figure again, not even when they lit the fire and started cooking. But he kept looking over his shoulder. Denise noticed it. His ears were tuned for things not there. That night, the forest seemed louder than usual. Insects chirped and then stopped all at once. Coyotes howled and then silenced mid-cry. The wind rustled leaves that didn't seem to move. Somewhere off to the north, wood knocked on wood in a rhythm that didn't sound like nature. Denise woke around 3 to the sound of footsteps, heavy ones, crunching the pine litter just outside the tent. She reached out in the dark, felt Lyle's sleeping bag, empty. She unzipped the flap as quietly as she could and peeked out. He was standing at the edge of the fire ring, staring into the trees. His flashlight was off, hanging limp from his hand. Denise stepped out, her breath fogging. In the cold air, "Lyle?" He didn't turn. "It's hanging again," he said, "right above us." Her head snapped up toward the trees. The oak near their campsite wasn't nearly as tall as the one they'd passed earlier, but its branches still stretched wide. And in the fork of the highest limb, something large and dark hung motionless, just like before. "No wind," Lyle said flatly. "No rope, but it's swaying again." Denise's chest tightened. Her legs went cold. "That's not possible. We left it behind." It followed. She pulled at his arm. "We need to go. Now pack up. We'll hike out with headlamps." Lyle nodded slowly, as if underwater. But as he turned toward the tent, the thing above them jerked another unnatural twitch. It didn't fall. It didn't climb. It just shifted like it was adjusting its view. They left everything but their water bottles and flashlights. Left the tent, the food, the sleeping bags. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. They just ran. By the time they reached the car, the sun was rising, pink-orange bleeding through the fog. Neither of them looked back until they were already speeding down the dirt road that led out of the park, but just before they hit the main road, Denise saw it reflected in the rearview mirror, hanging from the old wooden gate at the trailhead. No rope, just dangling there like some enormous shadow, still swaying as if waiting for someone else to stop and look. They didn't report it. What would they say? That a tree ghost followed them? That something had unlatched itself from the canopy and taken an interest in them. They tried to move on, but Lyle changed. Slowly, over the next few weeks, he started staring at trees again. Wouldn't walk under low-hanging branches. Wouldn't park under oaks. One night, Denise found him standing in the backyard beneath a big pecan tree, staring up and murmuring something too soft to hear. His eyes were wide. She had to shake him awake even though he wasn't sleeping. And then came the day she woke up to find him gone. The back door was open. The flashlight was gone. His boots? The sheriff found his footprints along the same trail they'd hiked months before, leading right up to the bend near mile marker 8. Past the tree, but no footprints after that. Just stopped cold in the dirt. They searched the area for 2 days. No signs, not even animals. The woods went quiet. No birdsong. No crickets. Just a stillness that felt wrong. Denise went back one last time. Alone. She parked in the lot and walked the path she and Lyle had taken together. When she reached the tree, she forced herself to look up. It was hanging there again. That same
swaying figure, but this time it was wearing Lyle's boots.
His jacket. And his hand, if that's what it was, hung low, the fingers twisted and long. He was looking down at her with empty eyes. Still no rope. Still no movement in the branches. Just that shadow suspended. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just whispered, "Let him go." But it didn't. It never does. And now, every night since, when she closes her eyes, she dreams of that tree. Of the branches swaying soundlessly. Of shadows that never fall. And of something unseen climbing down, inch by inch, closer each time. The sun had barely crested the tree line when Lena parked her car at the dusty trailhead off Farm to Market Road 1395, about 30 miles outside Bandera, Texas. The sign read, "Clear Hollow Loop, 4.2 miles, though the last few letters were half-eaten by weather and time. The parking area was empty, just gravel, weeds, and a rusted trash barrel that someone had shot full of holes. Lena zipped her windbreaker, clipped on her hydration pack, and started walking. She was out here to clear her mind. After the third sleepless night in a row and annoying pressure in her chest she couldn't shake, she figured a solo hike would reset something inside her. The first mile was uneventful. Birds trilled somewhere up in the canopy, a hawk screeched in the distance, and the wind moved through the trees like something half alive. Oaks and mesquites leaned over the narrow path, which was barely a foot wide and lined with broken twigs and patches of yellowing grass. A few times she paused, looking back just to admire how far she'd come. But something about the way the trail looked behind her gave her pause. It wasn't the usual back trail. No familiar fork in the path, no broken stump she'd seen earlier. It looked flatter, newer, as if someone had just drawn it into the landscape. She turned back around and kept going. It was nothing. The morning light, the curve of the terrain, it played tricks. That's all. Her boots crunched over gravel and dry leaves. The trail dipped into a shaded hollow, and for a moment the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The air felt moist and heavy, and there was the faintest smell of mildew, like a flooded basement, or the dark underside of an old dock. A twig snapped behind her. She turned out. The trail behind her curved a different direction. That wasn't right. She had come straight downhill. She was sure of it. But now it curved, left behind her like a question mark carved into the earth. Her brow furrowed. Maybe she had veered. Maybe there were switchbacks and she hadn't noticed. Still, the sense that the trail was subtly misbehaving didn't sit well. She looked down. Her own boot prints were missing. The dirt should have held them, but the ground behind her looked undisturbed, like no one had passed through it all. She kept walking. A mile later, she passed an old tree with a bent trunk. A strange one, gnarled low to the ground like a crippled animal, its bark scarred with strange V-shaped grooves. She brushed her fingers along one of the grooves and winced. It felt warm. Too warm for the shade. She pulled her hand back and rubbed her fingers together. Sticky? Sap? Maybe 10 minutes later, she looked back again. The tree wasn't there. The trail behind her led into a patch of tall grass, untrampled, like a meadow untouched by boots. And beyond that, something else had changed. There were no hills. Just a flat horizon, a pale yellow sky above the trees that didn't match what she remembered from before. She spun back forward and quickened her pace. At mile 3, the path narrowed. So much so that the trees on either side were scraping her arms. The sunlight had vanished. The canopy above was too thick now, and the trees, they weren't oaks anymore. They looked older. Wrong. Their bark was smooth and gray like weathered bone. Their branches tangled overhead like veins in the ceiling of a mausoleum. The trail was no longer dirt, but something darker, almost black. Her breathing grew shallow. When she looked back this time, there was no trail at all. Only trees. Close. Too close. Pressing in as if they had never parted. Panic spiked in her chest. She turned in a slow circle. Ahead of her, the path still led forward, narrow, black, weaving deeper into the woods. But behind her, it had vanished entirely. She crouched. Low, trying to find footprints. Nothing. No indentations. No scuffs. No trace that anyone, even she, had come through. She tried retracing her steps anyway, but every few paces, she would glance back and find that the trail had moved. Or, worse, split into 2, then 3. Branches she hadn't passed were now in front of her. Trees stood where there had been none. She stopped, panting, realizing she was no longer sure which direction was forward and which was back. Her phone had no signal. The compass app spun in circles like it was drunk. Her limbs felt heavy. Her hands shook. She whispered to herself, "This is just woods. Just Texas woods." But it wasn't. There were no sounds now. No birds, no wind. Just a low, steady hum. Faint, like the inside of a refrigerator, but rhythmic, pulsing slightly like breath. She picked a direction, walked fast. Didn't look back. Then she heard footsteps. Not her own. Crunch, 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 crunch. Froze. The steps came from the trail behind her, or what used to be the trail. Through the trees now, weaving past the trunks in a line. Not a straight one, more like a spiral. Something circling her. She crouched again and peered through the undergrowth. A shadow moved. Low, then stood. Its shape was wrong, too tall, too thin. It had arms but no face. A black slit where a mouth should be. And it didn't walk. It glided, smoothly, like it didn't quite touch the ground. She backed away slowly, breath caught in her throat, every nerve in her body screaming. To run, but the thing stopped, tilted its head, as if listening, and then It opened its mouth. A voice came out. Her own voice. "I see you, Lena," she bolted. Crashed through the brush. Branches tore at her arms, her legs. She ran until her lungs burned, until her vision blurred. Then suddenly, sunlight. She burst through the tree line into a wide clearing she didn't remember entering. The sky was pale blue again, and the trees were normal, oak and pecan and cedar. And ahead, there was the trailhead. Her car. Lena ran to it, ripped the door open, fumbled with the keys, slammed them into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, she looked once more at the trail. It was there, clear as day, neatly marked, winding into the woods like any other. But something small moved just past the tree line, not walking, not crawling. Sliding. She threw the car into reverse and didn't stop until she hit the main road. Back in town. Lena couldn't explain what had happened. Her GPS app showed her route 2.1 miles, not the full loop. It cut off halfway through, like she'd disappeared. The next day she returned with 2 rangers, but they found nothing strange. No black soil, no vanishing trails, no bent tree with V-shaped scars, no old bone-colored trees. Just woods. Still, Lena never hiked again. And at night, sometimes when she lies awake, she hears her own voice whisper from somewhere deep in the house, "I see you, Lena." And when she goes to check, the hallway looks just a little different than it did before, like it was just now made, like it never existed, until she turned around. It was already late afternoon when Owen's boots crunched over the gravel shoulder of the back road near Lake Whitney, his backpack riding heavy on his shoulders, shirt soaked through at the armpits. He wasn't lost, not exactly, but he'd definitely overshot the turnoff that should have led to the creek trail he'd planned to follow back toward the campsite. The sun hung low over the trees, bleeding orange through the oak and cedar branches, and the air had that dry, hot stillness that only Texas summers can hold right before dusk sinks its teeth in. He'd been walking for over an hour since realizing he was going the wrong way, but he hadn't seen a single car or person, only fence lines swallowed by brush, broken barbed wire, and the occasional hollowed-out deer blind. His GPS flickered out 10 minutes ago. No signal, just the blinking, searching bar mocking him from the screen. He wasn't worried yet, but that kind of isolation had a way of sinking under your skin, like a splinter you didn't notice until the infection started. That's when he saw it. Just past a bend in the trail and half hidden by a thick patch of cedar, there was a gap, not a road, exactly, but more like an old fire break, barely wide enough for a truck. And off that path, tucked maybe 40 yards into the trees, sat a small log cabin. It was strange, not because of its condition, it looked old. Yeah, but solid, but because it was there at all. He'd studied the topo map for this area for hours the night before. There weren't any structures marked near the trail. No ranger stations. No outposts. Nothing. Still, there it stood. A squat, single-story cabin with a slanted metal roof, smoke curling from the chimney. The porch sagged slightly, but the wood looked oiled and freshly swept. The windows weren't broken or boarded. Curtains hung inside them. A rocking chair sat still in one corner, untouched by wind or time. He stared for a long minute. The thought of stepping onto that porch scratched at something in the back of his skull, like a whisper you can't quite make out but still understand. Enough to know it's a warning, but logic overruled instinct. A place like this, out in the woods with a fire going, meant someone was home, and someone home meant maybe a phone, or a ride, or at the very least, directions. Hello? He called out as he stepped off the trail. No answer. His boots cracked twigs as he walked the narrow path toward the porch, and still nothing moved. No breeze, no bugs, Not even the usual rustle of branches you'd expect from a raccoon or bird. Just silence. Anyone home? He asked again, louder this time, stepping onto the creaking wooden boards. The doorknob wasn't locked. He pressed his hand to it, and it turned easily beneath his palm. He hesitated. Every part of him, every nerve from his teeth to his spine, told him to leave. But he stepped inside. The air was warm. Too warm. The fireplace was lit. Not embers, not dying coals, but a full flame, flickering low and steady. The cabin interior was small, maybe 2 rooms. A front room with a table, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf with spines that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. On the table sat a bowl of stew. Still steaming. The second room, just visible past a cracked open door, held a neatly made bed with wool blankets tucked tight. A pair of boots sat next to it. Not old, worn-down relics. These were recent, polished. Black. Owen backed up, hand still on the doorknob, not fully inside. Maybe someone was just out back. Maybe they were hunting or gathering wood. Maybe. Then he looked at the window. First, he didn't register what was wrong. It was just trees out there, same as the rest of the area. But there was a shape between 2 tree trunks, maybe 30 yards out. A dark silhouette, not moving, not swaying, not breathing. Watching. He blinked, and it was gone. He stepped back out, scanning the woods. Hey, I didn't mean to barge in, just got lost. Still nothing. The woods just held their breath. No response. No movement. He stood there, uncertain, trying to weigh options. Sun was dipping fast. It would be dark in 20 minutes. This place was shelter, food, warmth, and whoever lived here clearly wasn't gone long. But something in him, that old caveman sense that's been stomped out by cities and streetlights, started to itch at the base of his neck. He knew better than to ignore it. He left the porch and circled around the back of the cabin, calling out again. Hey, just looking to borrow a phone or get a ride back to town. Nothing behind the cabin, just chopped wood. A rain barrel, a rusty axe sunk into a stump. Number. Footprints in the dirt. No tire tracks nearby. No sign of anyone. And the strange part, the real strange part, was how pristine everything was. Too clean, too staged. The woodpile was stacked like a photo in a country magazine. The axe blade shimmered like it had been oiled that morning. Owen turned back toward the cabin and froze. The rocking chair on the porch was moving, not fast. Just a slow, steady rhythm, like someone had just gotten up from it. His heart hammered in his chest. That chair had been still when he arrived. He hadn't heard anything. No footfalls. No boards creaking. Just... Now it moved. He looked back toward the trees. Same 2 trunks. Same gap. The silhouette was there again. This time closer. Still. He backed away. Hands up like someone might fire a gun at him. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want anything to do with this. But he'd already stepped too deep into it. That's when the front door of the cabin slammed, shut behind him. He didn't touch it, didn't hear wind, didn't see a hand. Just the sound, wooden and final. The rocking chair stopped, and in the silence, from the trees, he heard the faintest sound like breathing. Wet and ragged. No animal made that sound. No person should make that sound either. He turned and ran, didn't care where the trail was anymore. Just ran, but the woods didn't look the same. The trees leaned wrong. The moss was on the wrong sides of the trunks. He couldn't see the road anymore. Just thick brush and darkening sky and that awful breathing following him. Not fast, just steady. Like whatever it was knew he'd get tired first. He stopped after what felt like an hour. Chest burning, throat raw. Nothing behind him. Nothing but woods. And when he turned back, there it was. The cabin dot in front of him again dot same porch dot same rocking chair, same firelight, flickering behind the curtains, like he'd never left, like he'd just circled once and come. Home dot he backed up, tripped. Fell dot and from the tree line, something stepped forward dot not a man, not a beast dot just. Wrong dot its face was pale, slack-jawed, too long, like someone had tried to carve a human out of wax and forgotten how mouths should. Sit. Its arms were longer than they should be. Its eyes, black, glassy, glistening, never blinked. And they locked on his face like it knew him dot. It pointed toward the porch dot. Owen didn't move dot. It took a step closer. He felt warm liquid soak his jeans. Didn't care dot. It pointed again. And that's when the cabin door opened dot wide dot welcoming dot the fire. Flared inside. And the thing? Smiled. Owen screamed. But in those woods, miles from any road or map, no one heard, except the thing watching, and the cabin that waited for him to sit. It had been a hot, dragging kind of August day in Burnett County, the kind that sticks to your skin even after the sun starts to dip behind the cedar trees. Lena had driven out past Hoover's Creek with her camera, a Nikon she'd been gifted by her older sister when she turned 29 last year. She wasn't a photographer by trade, more of a hobbyist who posted dreamy landscapes on Instagram and tagged them with vague captions like "Golden Hour Speaks" and "Silence." Mostly, it was a way to feel less alone since the divorce. A little. Control over how the world looked, at least through the lens. That evening she'd parked off an unmarked trail that branched behind an old cattle fence. The wood was dry and gray, brittle in her hands as she climbed over. She walked a while, picking her way through dry brush, sweat darkening the neckline of her t-shirt, until she reached a rocky bluff that faced west over the valley. The view was wide, untouched, the kind of place you'd think only deer and wind knew. It made her chest feel both open and hollow at the same time. The sunset was burning down in brilliant color, reds and ambers leaking across the sky like the last gasps of a dying fire. Lena stood still, adjusted the zoom, and snapped 3 shots in quick succession. Then she sat on a smooth stone and watched the light disappear. She didn't check the photos until she got back to her car half an hour later, with dusk climbing fast behind her, the way it does out there when the woods grow thick with blue shadows. She felt a strange prickling across her back as she unlocked the door. Just the usual twilight paranoia, she told herself. The imagination gets greedy when it's quiet for too long. The first photo was what she expected. The bluffs jagged, edge cutting across the amber sky. The second, more vivid, the clouds had caught a violent streak of purple. But the third, her finger hovered. She zoomed in. There, near the lower left corner of the frame, just over her right shoulder, a shape, a human shape. Faint, barely distinguishable in the orange wash of light, but unmistakably there. A head tilted slightly, a shoulder slouched in a peculiar way, as though boneless. The most chilling part wasn't the face, it was how it seemed to be looking through the photo. As if it knew, the mouth was open, smiling, not wide, not exaggerated, just a slight upward curl of the lips. Pleased. Expectant. Lena sat frozen in her car for a good minute, the screen glowing in her hand, her heart skittering like something loose in a paper bag. She looked behind her. The gravel road was empty. Nothing but the tall grass swing in the ditches and the last pink scrape of the sun against the clouds. She told herself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a branch or the uneven rock behind her. She hadn't heard anyone. She would have heard someone. The bluff was open, no place to hide, but she didn't sleep well that night. The image lingered. At 3 a.m., she got up and transferred the photo to her laptop, zoomed in again, adjusted contrast, exposure. Every tweak made the face more distinct, not less. She could see now that the eyes weren't normal. They weren't dark. They were pale, almost colorless like cloudy marbles. And the more she stared, the more she thought she could see teeth just behind the lips. Too many. Small and flat and even like a child's doll. She closed the laptop, shut it tight like slamming a door. 2 days passed. She didn't go out much, kept the lights low. Stayed indoors even when the sky outside turned to a soft, forgiving gray. The photo had crawled into her head like a splinter under skin. She started noticing odd things small at first. The back door was unlatched one morning, even though she remembered locking it. The porch light flickered erratically around midnight, even after she replaced the bulb. She heard footsteps once on the gravel outside her window, but when she peeked through the curtain, there was nothing. Then the whispers started. They weren't loud. More like the sound of someone talking just beyond a closed door. One night, around 1 a.m., she leaned her ear to the living room wall and held her breath. The voice was thin, genderless, like someone practicing words they'd never used before. Not to her, but about her. She came back. Knows now? Waited. She left the house the next day and stayed at a friend's in Marble Falls. Didn't tell her much, just that she needed a break from the house, from everything. When pressed, she showed her the picture. The friend squinted, then laughed it off. Said it was probably a trick of light or a bush that looked like a person. Lena didn't argue, but that night, the whisper followed her. She woke in the guest bedroom, drenched in sweat, to the unmistakable sound of someone breathing just behind. The closet door. Long, slow inhales, rhythmic. Patient thought she didn't open it. She waited until morning and left without explanation. She tried deleting the photo next. Highlighted it, hit the delete key. Moved it to the trash, then emptied the trash. Restarted the laptop. It was still there. Same folder. Same file name. Same timestamp. She tried again. This time 3 versions appeared, each one slightly altered. The face in the photo closer. The smile wider. The head tilted more to the side. In one, the eyes looked directly at her. She shut the laptop, shoved it under the bed. By the following week, Lena wasn't herself. The face had embedded itself behind her eyes. When she blinked, she saw it in the corners of rooms. When she walked past mirrors, she caught glimpses not of herself, but of something standing just behind her shoulder. Always just behind. She called a local priest. He came, said a few prayers, sprinkled some holy water, told her to rest. That night, she found a new picture on her phone. She hadn't taken it. It was a photo of her asleep. From the edge of the bed, the face was there too, floating near the footboard. Pale, grinning, watching. She smashed the phone. Then the laptop, moved in with her sister in Fort Worth, changed her number, quit her job, started therapy. For a while, she tried to forget, but they say she still won't walk near windows at dusk, that she covers mirrors with cloth, that she won't let anyone take her picture, not even at family gatherings, and if you ask why, she only tell you once she took a photo of the sunset, and something smiled back. The first time Wade heard it, he was perched on the edge of the limestone outcrop overlooking Twin Devils Canyon, the kind of godforsaken crack in the Texas hill country that didn't show up on most maps unless you were a hunter or one of those backwoods weirdos who spent weekends cataloging snake sightings and bones. Wade wasn't either. He was just tired of the noise, of people, of everything that buzzed and beeped and took more than it gave. The canyon was quiet, dead. Quiet, and that's what drew him in. He'd parked his beat-up truck off a 2-track trail just south of Johnson City and hiked in with a thermos of whiskey and a folding chair, hoping for a long, lonesome sunset. But then the baby cried. It was soft at first, almost drowned by the canyon's wind, which whistled through the rocks like some ancient flute. He tilted his head and frowned, thinking maybe it was in his own damn imagination. Then it came again, higher this time, desperate, like the sound of an infant left too long in a cold crib. A strange echo followed it, repeating just a second too late to be natural. Wade stood up slowly, scanning the brush and tree line behind him. Nothing but mesquite and live oaks, gnarly as witch hands. No campers, no hikers, no nearby houses. "Hello?" he called out, voice cracking like the dry grass under his boots. "Somebody out there?" Silence. Then another wail. It seemed lower now, like it was coming from the canyon floor. He walked to the edge and peered down, gripping a thorny cedar limb for balance. The canyon dropped off maybe 50 feet, ragged and uneven, with a narrow trickle of water cutting through the bottom like a surgical scar. The sun was starting to slip below the rim, throwing long shadows into the crevices. That cry came again. Wade wasn't a father. Never had been. Never wanted to be. But that sound, it did something to him. Crawled into his ribs and scratched around. He didn't think. He just started climbing down. The descent was steep, and the loose shale didn't help. Twice he slipped, catching himself on root-knotted vines and jutting sandstone. By the time he reached the bottom, he was scraped and sweating, with dust clinging to his jeans and the distinct feeling that this was a bad idea. Still, he pressed forward. The crying had stopped. He turned in a slow circle, eyes trying to adjust to the gloom. The walls of the canyon towered above him now, making it feel more like a grave than a place on earth. The wind died, and with it, every sound. No birds, no bugs. Just the soft crunch of his boots on the gravel path below. Then it cried again. This time, it was close. Too close. He spun to his right, and there, wedged between two boulders, was something small and pale. His heart kicked. He took a step forward. Hey, little one, it's okay." The thing squirmed. He took another step, and the last light of the sun struck the space between the rocks, just enough to illuminate what lay there. It wasn't a baby. Not even close. It had the shape of one, sure curled up, hands tiny and clenched, with what looked like thin hair on its scalp. But the skin wasn't right. It wasn't skin. It was slick, like clay that hadn't dried yet, the color of old candle wax. The eyes were open but pitch black and too large for the face, wide and staring. The mouth, if you could call it that, hung open in a stretched circle, soundless now but trembling, as if it were trying to form the next cry. Wade froze, and then it smiled, not with its mouth, with its whole body. The shoulders pulled back. The spine arched, and something beneath the surface pulsed, like veins swimming underwater. He backed away. It moved. No crawling, no stumbling. Just suddenly closer. He turned to run, but the path wasn't there anymore. Where the canyon had once opened behind him, there was now only stone, walling him in. He spun, heart hammering, and saw the thing again, closer still, standing now. It wasn't a baby. It had never been a baby. It was something wearing that sound like a lure, something that knew how humans thought, how they cared. It mimicked a wail, but the noise was off now, wet and guttural, too deep in the throat. He bolted sideways, scrambling up the canyon wall, fingers bleeding as he dug into the cracks. The thing didn't follow him right away. It waited, watched, as if deciding whether he was worth the chase. When he glanced back halfway up, it had begun to climb, not using limbs but flowing, like smoke pulled uphill, smooth and unnatural. Didn't scream until he reached the top. Didn't stop running until he reached his truck. Didn't sleep that night or the next. He told a sheriff's deputy in Johnson City. The man squinted at him like he was drunk or insane. Searched the canyon. With the team the next morning, found nothing but boot prints. No baby, no tracks, no sign that anything had been there at all. But Wade knew because he could still hear it. That night, lying in bed, far from the canyon, far from that crack in the earth where the thing had waited, he heard it outside his window. Soft, crying, calling, waiting for him to come close enough to see its face again. They weren't the kind of hikers who usually went off the beaten path. Sarah liked her maps laminated and folded tight with the creases aligned. Ben kept a backup compass even though they both had GPS on their phones, and his idea of risk was letting his coffee cool before screwing the cap back on. But that weekend was different. Maybe it was the quiet, how still everything felt near Lost Pines, Texas. Maybe it was the slow season, barely a soul around in the park. Maybe it was just a weird itch in their brains to do something a little different, a little stupid. The sign hadn't looked like much. Just a wooden post crooked with age, bark splinters peeling from where names had been carved long ago and mostly worn down to nothing. Fern Hollow Trail, it had said, in letters. So faint Sarah had to tilt her head to catch the light just right. No path markers, no warnings, just a narrow, brown path disappearing between the trees like it was trying to stay hidden. Want to try it? Sarah had said, already stepping toward it before Ben could object. I don't think that's on the map, Ben replied, turning the folded paper in his hand. That's the point, she smiled. Just a quick look, so they walked in. 2 by 2, like kids in a fire drill. The path narrowed quickly, closed in by dry brush and the tall pines. The forest was known for. It wasn't long before the sunlight thinned, the thick canopy turning the sky into a green haze. Sarah kept ahead, brushing past spiderwebs and ducking low branches, while Ben fell a few steps behind, checking the map anyway out of habit. There was no Fern Hollow Trail listed. Not on the park's paper maps, not on Google, not even mentioned. On the Reddit threads he'd scoured the week before. Weird, he muttered under his breath, folding it back into his pocket. They walked for maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. Neither could really say later on. The trees had that hypnotic sameness about them, every trunk thick with lichen, bark peeling like old skin. The ground covered in brown needles and dead leaves. No birds, no squirrels. Just the occasional wind. Ripple and their own footsteps. Then they stopped. It wasn't a decision, they both just did. Like their legs had hit some invisible break. The trail behind them was gone, not faded, not overgrown. Gone. Sarah turned full around, confusion puckering her brow. Wait, was it this narrow when we came in? Ben was already walking back the way they thought they'd come, pushing through the underbrush. He didn't get far. 10 steps in, and the trees were different. Not just out of place, but wrong. A tight ring of tall, spindly pines had formed behind them, packed so closely together you'd have to break bones to squeeze through. No sign of a trail. No footprints. Sarah walked around in a slow circle, looking up. The trees moved, she said flatly, like her brain didn't quite know how to argue with itself. They weren't like that before. Ben didn't answer. He was focused on the silence, the kind that rings in your ears. No birds, no breeze. The trees didn't sway. Even their own breathing felt muffled. They stood there for a while, quietly, trying not to panic. Okay, Sarah said finally, we'll just keep walking forward. We've still got signal, right? But when they checked their phones, the bars were gone. GPS frozen. A blue dot stuck in a gray patch of nowhere. They pressed on anyway. Because what else do you do when the forest closes behind you? The trail. Ahead was still there, but it felt different, subtle at first. The dirt looked darker, more compacted, like it had been recently trampled. But no footprints, no signs of other hikers. Just the same dried needles scattered across the ground and the smell like old rot. Like mushrooms crushed underfoot. And then the noises started. Soft footsteps off to the side. Too light for a person. Too steady for an animal. Always matching their pace. Always just out of sight. Sarah whispered, "Did you hear that?" Ben nodded, lips tight. They stopped. The sound stopped. They moved. It moved. They tried shouting just a hello at first, followed by louder calls. But the forest swallowed it. Their voices didn't echo. Didn't even seem to go more than a few feet. Like speaking underwater. Another hour passed. Maybe 2 or 10 minutes. They couldn't tell. The light never changed. The sun didn't rise or fall. Time slipped through their fingers like water. And then they found the campsite. A clearing just wide enough for a tent. A small fire pit in the center, black and cold. But the coals were warm. Ben reached down and brushed the ash still fresh. "Someone was just here," he said. Sarah looked around. "Where'd they go?" No trails let out. No gear left behind. Just the vague scent of smoke and something sour beneath it. Then Ben saw the carvings in the nearby tree. Letters scratched deep into the bark. Names: Miles 2003, Letty 2011, JEN 2014, RYN 2017, and below those, faint but new Ben and Sarah. The same letters. Same shaky hand. Sarah stepped back. "Did you do that?" "No, neither of them could look away for a long time. That night, or what felt like night, they tried sleeping in shifts. But the dark didn't come. The light stayed frozen in perpetual afternoon. The trees loomed around the clearing like sentries, tall and silent and wrong. Every time one of them closed their eyes, they'd hear the rustling. Sometimes it sounded like leaves. Sometimes it sounded like breathing. Sarah swore she saw movement once. A figure standing between the trunks, not walking, not hiding, just watching. But when she blinked, it was gone. By the third cycle, they were running low on water. Ben marked the trees with his knife as they walked slashes in the bark. But after each turn, the marks vanished. Or moved. Once he swore one of the gashes had healed. Sarah tried counting her steps, but her numbers looped. She'd start at 1, reach 40, and somehow be back at 16. That's when they heard voices. Not their own. Not echoes. Children at first, whispering, then laughter, then something that sounded like crying. They followed it. Because they couldn't not. Because it was something. It led them to another clearing, this one wider. A dry creek bed cutting through, the water long vanished. At the center was a tree stump, and around it, shoes. Dozens of them. All sizes, all styles, all old. Some buried in moss, others fresh. One pair was Sarah's brand. Her size. She didn't say anything, just stared. Ben walked toward the stump. There were carvings there too. Not names this time, just a spiral. Deep and dark and endless. He reached out. "Man," Sarah said, "don't." But he touched it, and the trees rustled for the first time. All around them. Shaking, breathing. Sarah grabbed his arm. "We have to go, now." But they couldn't find the trail. Couldn't find the clearing. The forest had rearranged itself. Again. They ran. No plan. Just panic. The wood shifted, bent, opened and closed like lungs. Branches scratched at their faces. Brambles tore at their clothes. Every time they stopped, the spiral would be there on a tree trunk, on a rock, even etched into the dirt. It followed them. Or maybe they followed it. Sarah collapsed first. Her legs just gave out. Ben tried to lift her, but she was staring past him. "Ben," she whispered. He turned. Something stood between the trees, tall, thin, bark for skin. No eyes, no mouth. But it leaned, tilted, listening. When Ben moved, it moved. When he spoke, it cocked its head. Then it stepped closer. They ran again, and the trees swallowed them. No trail. No sun. No end. Somewhere in the stillness, their names were carved into bark again. Fresh this time. Deep. Permanent. They called it Dead Man's Crossing long before the girl died there, back when the trail was just a dirt path cutting through cedar and mesquite between the hills east of Llano. Ranchers used to bring cattle through there, and there were stories, even then, of horses panicking for no reason near the ravine, that place where the creek narrowed and the limestone dropped off suddenly, like the earth had been bitten through and left to rot. They said you could hear the water whispering if you stood still long enough, like a voice too far away to understand, like breath on the back of your neck. I never believed any of it, not until I saw her. I was 31 when it happened. Had just moved back to Texas from Tucson after the divorce, after everything in Arizona fell apart. I took a job teaching at a community college in Fredericksburg, part-time, and spent most weekends driving around hill country trying to remember what it felt like to belong somewhere. I found Dead Man's Crossing by accident one October afternoon, while looking for a place to hike. It wasn't on the state park maps, but the ranger at the Burnett station said locals still used it unofficially. You'll see the old sign nailed to a cedar trunk about 3 miles down CR 412, he said. Trail's faint, but it's there. He didn't warn me about the girl. Nobody ever really warns you, not until after. Like how they never talk. About the smell that clings to the rocks near the ravine, or the way your ears feel like they're filling with water, even when it hasn't rained in weeks. The trail was narrow, unmarked, and overgrown in places, but I kept going. The air smelled like dust and cedar bark, and cicadas buzzed low in the scrub as I moved deeper in. There was a stillness to the place. No wind, no birds, just that kind of hush you only get when you're somewhere the world has forgotten. The deeper I went, the more wrong it felt, not in an obvious way. Not like I was being watched, but like I'd stepped into a memory that didn't belong to me. Around mile 4, I found a rotted wood post jammed into the dirt with a rusted horseshoe nailed to it. Below it, a small cross made of twine and twigs leaned sideways. Someone had placed a stone at the base. That's when I heard the water. It wasn't loud. Just a soft trickle. Not enough to explain the way the ground felt cooler, damper. The trail dipped, then curved around a thicket of mesquite and opened to a shallow clearing with a view of the ravine. I stepped toward it, careful not to slip on the loose gravel near the edge. 30 feet below, a thin creek twisted between the rocks, its surface black with shadow and crawling with mist. Even from up there, I could hear it whispering. That was the word that came to mind, not rushing or trickling, but whispering, like a secret being passed through stone. Then I saw her. She was on the far side of the ravine, maybe 20 feet from where I stood. A girl, maybe 16 or 17, in a long white dress that clung to her body like wet cloth. Her hair was dark and plastered to her face and neck. She wasn't walking, just standing, with her arms slack at her sides, and her head tilted slightly like she was listening. I opened my mouth to call out, to ask if she was okay, if she was lost, but she raised one hand and pointed, not at me. Not across the ravine. She pointed downward. Into the water. Her arm stayed extended like that, stiff and unnatural. And I remember thinking how strange it was that she wasn't shivering. She was soaked, dripping from her sleeves and fingers, and the sun was almost gone. The whole scene was silent, and then, all at once, she was gone. Just no longer there. I blinked. Stepped forward, leaned over the edge. Nothing. Not a splash, not a footstep. Just the creek whispering below and the cold creeping up my legs. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I searched online for hours, trying to find something, anything, about that trail. Eventually, I found an old thread on a message board from 2008, buried deep just a few posts. Someone mentioned a local girl named Sarah Beth Harlan who drowned in the ravine in 1983, 17 years old. Went missing on her way home from church. They found her dress snagged on a tree root at the water's edge, but never recovered the body. Locals believe the current pulled her down into a limestone tunnel that runs beneath the bluff. The same message board claimed hikers had seen her, always silent, always dripping, always pointing. I told myself I had imagined it. That maybe. I'd seen a reflection or a deer or even just drifted into some kind of waking dream. I even stopped hiking altogether for a while. But that winter, after a stretch of heavy rains, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about the way she pointed. Something about the way the water sounded when I was near it. Like it was calling. I went back in January, it was colder, and the trail was even harder to follow with the underbrush thinned out and the ground soft from all the rain. The whispering started earlier this time, just 2 miles in, but louder, clearer. I reached the ravine at dusk, and everything looked different. The creek was swollen and the mist rose higher. The water wasn't just whispering now, it was humming. Like a vibration you could feel in your teeth. She was already there when I arrived. Same dress, same dripping hair. But this time she was closer, on my side of the ravine. Standing 10 feet away, right at the edge, facing the drop. Her hand moved slowly, rising again, that same deliberate motion. Pointing. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to turn around and forget I ever saw her. But my legs carried me forward. I stepped beside her. I looked down. There was something in the water. At first, it looked like a shadow, long, thin, moving with the current. Then I saw it rise, just beneath the surface. Pale fingers. A face that was wrong, bloated and warped with eyes like dark holes. It opened its mouth, and I swear to God, it whispered my name. I stumbled back, tripped, and hit the ground hard. When I looked up, she was gone again, but I didn't run. Not yet. I crawled to the edge again. The water was still, no shadow, no face, just that low, humming whisper. I got up and walked straight out of those woods, never looking back, not. Even when the air behind me felt like it moved, I tried to tell someone. A coworker, then a friend from town. They nodded, said it was probably just a hallucination, stress, trauma from the divorce. But one old man, the guy who runs the antique shop near the courthouse, he just listened. When I finished, he sighed. She only points at the ones the creek wants. I asked him what that meant. He didn't explain. Just turned away and said, "Don't go back." But I did. Last week. I don't know why. Maybe because her face haunts me in dreams now. Maybe because every time I turn on the sink or the shower, I swear I hear the whispering again. I can't avoid water. You try living without it, but now it follows me. In puddles and glass reflections, in steam on the mirror. Sometimes I see her in the background, standing, pointing, always dripping wet. I went back because I needed to know. Because something in me, maybe the part that's broken, couldn't let go. This time, I didn't see her until I reached the bottom of the ravine. I don't remember climbing down. I just was there. The creek was higher than I'd ever seen it, rushing over the rocks like it was alive. She stood in the water, waist deep, staring at me. And then she spoke. "You?" Heard it too. Her voice wasn't like a person's. It sounded like water itself had shaped the words, like it had been waiting to be spoken, and I answered without thinking, "Yes." She smiled, the saddest smile I've ever seen, and held out her hand. Should have run. I should have screamed. But I stepped forward. I don't remember what happened after that. Only that I woke up on the trail, my clothes soaked, my skin freezing, and bruises on my arms shaped like fingers. No one believes me, but I don't care anymore, because now I hear it all the time. The whispering, it's not outside me anymore, it's inside.